They're not lighting a fire to stop wild animals coming into your cave, at least not in most places. What are they? And another question to ask is, what are tomorrow's top value-added skills? What are the things that are going to get you a better job, make you feel like you're more prosperous, etc.? What are those skills? Now, there are lots of aspects to those skills, but I think one core skill that actually covers both of those is what I would call computational thinking. Being able to reason in a computational way, apply computation as one of the modes of problem solving, not the only mode. Here's the big problem we've got today. Where is this sitting in our school education? Where is computational thinking in our curricula around the world? Well, the place you'd expect to look for this is maths. Maths is the mainstream computational subject in our schools that's basically compulsory around the world. I'm going to argue it's 80% the wrong subject. So I don't think maths is achieving much computational thinking in our students, and it's causing all sorts of other problems as well. And why do I say that? Because I believe, we have a product named Mathematica. I believe in math, right? So why am I saying that? Well, there's one key big difference that's missed out. It's pretty obvious: computers. You see, in the real world, computers do almost all the calculating that makes math so valuable to our lives. In education, we make our students learn how to do all the calculating by hand. And when they're very, very lucky, if they've done that, they might be able to use a calculator. And if they've done that, they might be able to apply it to a real problem, 8 years later. Okay, there's a big problem. Those are 80% different. And that's why the math curricula, that means the fundamental issue, the math curricula around the world have a problem because they assume you've got to learn to calculate everything by hand. And that isn't what you need in the real world. You need to do much harder problems with a computer. So let's just step back from it. Why are we learning math in the first place? 3 good reasons. Technical jobs, math really empowers those, kind of the crucial piece, if it's the right math. Or this really should be the answer. Why should everyone learn the right math is really what I should be answering here. The second thing is what you might call everyday living. Just knowing how to function in a society. It's like reading and writing. You need literacy to just function. Nowadays, you need a certain amount of math, data science, data understanding to function, to be not dropped out of the society. And the third reason I might give is logical mind training. You could argue that in the past, classics people thought was this, philosophy. There are many aspects of it, but math is a good central subject you would hope would train this, even if not for its own right. So what's the problem? This is the slide I would most like to have shown you. But there are 4 steps to math. What is math? What is it when you're doing math? There are basically 4 steps. Define the question. If I talk for too long and we seal everything down, how long will you all survive? Don't know. It depends how much air there is and lots of other things. The second thing is to abstract it. I could talk about the question in English and hope we can figure out an answer, but it's much, much more powerful if I abstract it to a language that allows me to apply hundreds of years of calculation to that, now with a computer, to get an answer. So step 2 is abstracting it, to math, to code. Step 3 is computing, this magical step where we go from the question in abstract form to the answer in abstract form, x equals 3. And the 4th step is interpret. X equals 3, what did that mean? 3 hours to survive, x equals -5. Maybe I got the calculation wrong. Am I verifying this appropriately? Those are what math is about, the 4 steps. And what's gone crucially wrong is we are spending step 3 as a big long line at the moment, computing by hand. What we ought to be doing is getting our students to do much more of defining, abstracting, and interpreting, getting a computer to do step 3. So one of the things I like to show, if you go on to, if you have an iPhone, for example, you go onto Siri and you ask for solve x cubed plus 2x plus 1, you should get an answer through Siri from our Wolfram Alpha. Why do I like to show that? Because that's a problem that most students, after years of study, can't do by hand. So you have to ask, if I can ask my phone in 10 seconds to do that and it comes out with an answer, why the hell are we getting our students to learn this for years rather than doing higher level problems? So one of the things we need to do is approach problems, maths and all the things around computation. We need to start with real problems. What's the perfect password for your login? Great question for any 7-year-old so their friends don't break in. Am I normal? Can math help me figure that out? what is a beautiful shape? A very valid question. One of the questions we had for a country we worked with, Estonia, was, are girls better at maths? Go look at all the data, figure out what you think. Can the girls gain the answer differently from the boys? Key point. If you remove the computer from calculating in math education, you will remove almost all the context. Why do I say that? In the real world, why is math so predominant today, or computation? Because computers have mechanized this ancient process and allowed us to apply it to a huge range of areas. It was useful for bits of physics, useful for accountancy for hundreds of years, not useful for biology, not useful for many other areas that we are used to for it today. The computer has allowed the context because mechanized computation is required in order that you can apply this process, this four-step process. So if you remove the computer out of education, you can't apply the process to any of those contexts. You come up with knotty problems that we have in math exams, which don't mean anything. Everybody knows are fake. You can't do real biology. You can't do real data science. It's no good doing it with 5 points. It's a whole different set of tools that you would use. So removing the computer also changes the tool set, so then students are learning all the wrong tool set for what they'd actually need. They don't learn machine learning. Why? Well, machine learning can't be done without a computer. It doesn't make any sense. So it's not in the curriculum. So these are the kinds of issues that come up. And one of the things we often show is, a typical example in the classroom will be to get half the students to toss a coin, half the students to cheat by typing in heads and tails to the computer. Can the teacher tell who's cheated and who's actually done the real experiment? Answer, typically yes. The sequences are wrong if you do it by hand, if you cheat. And it's kind of nice to show this, and this is a typical thing that students are amazed by. How can the teacher tell that I cheated? Well, this is the beginning of how you would do credit card fraud detection, for example. You look at patterns of data. That's the real kind of thing you're doing, totally discrepant from what we do in the classroom today. One of the things we've been working on is working out what's the list of outcomes that you really want from 10 years of learning math. What does it look like? And it's on our website, computerbasedmath.org/outcomes. It's a very different list. Another question I'm often asked is, it has things, just to go back to that, it has things like, confidence to tackle new problems, not in the normal curriculum. Things like that, which are how to communicate and collaborate on technical ideas. How does computational thinking, maths, coding all relate? I think the most important thing is coding. Coding is a way to express step 2 of the process I talked about, the abstraction step. How do you write down the abstract ideas you have? Well, you traditionally used to write it in nice squiggly math stuff. Nowadays, in practice, you write it in code. That's the way you abstract. So coding is actually not exactly what most governments think it's for. Coding is, it's great for writing apps and things. It's just a way to express yourself as well. And I was going to do a nice demo with our Wolfram language, trying to do some live coding. Can't do that because my screen isn't working. One of the things we've been trying to do is build a very high-level language with algorithms included. So you can just directly do stuff. I was going to do a one-line piece of code that blocked my face out live off my video camera, for example. And that's easy to do if you've got kind of all the algorithms included. So I founded Computer-Based Math and also computationalthinking.org a few years ago, and it's a simple idea, which is build a curriculum assuming computers exist. Seems kind of obvious, but has yet to be done around the world. The other thing we've noticed is that you've got to build the curriculum backwards. The way curricula are built around the world is you have a bunch of people sitting in smoke-filled rooms, which probably aren't smoke-filled these days, but deciding that this piece of geometry is very important. They're usually math professors if it's math. And that's all fine, except the math professors don't know much about how math gets used in the real world. We've dealt for 30 years with trying to get millions of people actually using math, so we have more of a sort of rounded view of that. But what you've got to do is start with problems people might actually want to tackle, work back to the math you might actually use. Even us, even with all our experience, we kind of need to do that, and then check coverage and then build the curriculum that way. That seems a much more positive thing to do. One of the exciting things from this is you can reorder the curriculum based on conceptual, not computational complexity. So at the moment, when you think about which order you do stuff, it's all to do with how hard it is to calculate. Calculus is hard. Well, integrals are hard to calculate, so you do them late. Actually, calculus is pretty easy. Basics of calculus are pretty easy conceptually. And you should do it early. I think you should do it for 10-year-olds. Same machine learning, I think, for primary school children. Another amusing thing to muse on, should you do 3D geometry before 2D geometry? I'll leave that as an open question. So, just to summarize, there are two major effects of AI. Most of the panel, I think, will be discussing the other effect. The one I've talked about is what we need to learn, the subject. Because AI is changing and computation is changing the real world, that changes what we need to learn, and particularly the interface between humans and the machinery. You don't need to learn what the computer does to use the computer. And that's a facet of all industrial revolutions through history. You don't need to learn how the machinery works necessarily to use it, but you do need to learn how to interact with it, how it goes wrong, what you do about it. The thing we're going to be discussing much more is how we optimize learning given computers. Can we make it adaptive? Can we take whatever is the right subject and adapt to that and do things with that? So those are two things, and it's very important not to confuse those two sort of facets, though of course they join. So in a sense, AI drives the need for change, but it also provides the tools. And obviously, the effect of AI on pedagogy, personalization, assessment, rich content, adaptivity, own interests versus mainstream, these are all things that AI can help with. Now, the effect of AI on subjects, just to summarize, is to change what humans need to learn, including what's for the computer and what's for the human, and always use the real world as your guide. So to summarize, I'm arguing we should stand on the power of automation. You've got a choice in education. When automation comes along, mechanization, what do? Do you teach everyone what the machine does, or do you step on top of it and say, okay, we've got the machine, it's sort of ubiquitous, we're going to move on? I'm arguing strongly for the second, and I think if you look through history, the second always wins. And now it's for STEM. Now we've got this power for math, for computation, for STEM. We need to stand on it. Another way to put this is don't work a level up from the machines. Don't compete with them, because you'll lose. A fantastic job. So 1988, when Mathematica launched, Steve Jobs came up with the name Mathematica, and he also came up with a quote, which I love, which says, Mathematica will revolutionize the teaching and learning of math by focusing on the prose of mathematics without getting lost in the grammar. A very Jobsian kind of quote. I in fact, highlighted will, because the quote is so right and yet so wrong. He's so right, this should have happened, but we're still waiting. And that's kind of it. So I coined this term computational knowledge economy. For the next step after the knowledge economy is the computational knowledge economy, where we understand how we interact with computation as a human. So hope you can join our journey and transform education for the AI age. Thanks very much.
Conrad, wasn't that amazing, ladies and gents? What a cracking start. And okay, I want to know, please have a seat, so I want you to join us for our panel. I'd love to know how close an enlightened government around the world is to embracing what just seems shockingly good sense, actually. So we will find out. Next, I'm going to introduce up the panel. I'd like them all to come up together. They're going to be led out by Alex Beard from the Global Learning Lab. He has written a great book, which the FT have really rave-reviewed, on his global journey to discover what a 21st century education should look like. That's called Natural Born Learners. I plug it because chairs never plug themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Conrad. Thanks, everybody. So we are going to get into the discussion shortly. But essentially, I think, as a framing remark, I'd just like to say that my background's in education, and I've looked a lot at the future of what education will involve. And I basically think you can look at these three past revolutions in human learning. One that was about 100,000 years ago, that was a cognitive revolution. Something changed in our brains, and we were then able to create ideas. Language emerged, so we could pass ideas between people, pass them through generations. Then about 10,000 years ago came a schooling revolution, where we built institutions to teach this new technology that we had of reading and writing. And then there was a mass education revolution that came about 500 years ago, which gave us the printing press. Changes to religion meant that literacy exploded around the world and sort of gave us the school models that we have today. Well, I think that we're on the cusp, potentially, of a fourth learning revolution that's driven by new technologies and new understandings of the brain. And we're going to get into that a little bit in this session, and Conrad, of course, has already touched upon it. So we're going to begin with a little response from each of the 3 other panelists to Conrad's remarks and around the question of why we should be excited or potentially worried about the role that AI might play in the future of education. I'm going to start with Jolene.
Well, for AI, basically, should I introduce myself first?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. My name is Jolene from China. Our company's name is called Squirrel AI Learning. So we are doing AI adaptive learning. So we believe that AI will definitely not change education, but will revolutionize education, because AI has the potential to do like personalized learning for everyone, and it has infinitive computing power, and AI understands everything and more than human beings. So that's why AI has the potential to really revolutionize education in the future.
Do you want to add a bit about what Squirrel AI is doing?
Sure. We have an AI platform which is called Squirrel AI Learning Platform, and we have curriculum like English, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and Chinese, and built up into the platform. And then we give the students this learning account. Well, we charge, of course, we charge for money, and then they learn by themselves. And 70% of the time, the students learn from the AI system, and 30% of the time, there will be a human tutor interacting with the students. And our company founded in 2014, and we have 2 million students so far, and we have 2,000 physical learning centers. And our last year's revenue was $150 million US. Yeah. So should I do introduction or me?
Do you have anything more to add on Squirrel AI at this point?
Yeah, I do have a slide about introduction.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, should I do it now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, sorry. The click, yes. Yes, it's better to see in the screen, yeah. So we use this different kind of AI technology to build up our AI platform. And this part I've already mentioned. So our business model is online model plus offline physical learning location model. So both model is the same platform. So the students either learn from home or they go to the physical learning locations. And in the atmosphere, students, friends, and teachers are there. And 70% of the time, the students learn from the computer. There's no human interaction. And then 30% of the time, the human tutor will interact, because students need encouragement, need being monitored. And to approve the results of AI teaching, we held 4 competitions in the past 1.5 years. All the human-machine competitions show that the students learn from AI system won, and they have better scores. And also at the same time, the students from AI group, they learn more knowledge points than the human teacher groups. So this is the structure of our AI platform. There's 3 layers. The first one is we have learning content, we have learning map, we have the content map, we have the goals. And the second layer, we have the LRS, which is the learning record store, and we have the recommendation engine. And for the third layer, we have the real-time event collector. So for the learning map, in the student's brain, there are different knowledge graphs. So after the assessment of using our system, we can find out some of the red points means the students have not mastered the knowledge points. And the green ones means they have already mastered. And different color shows different level of mastery. And we have the worldwide first invented technique, which is called NKC, nanoscale breakdown of the knowledge components, which means, for example, a grade 8 of mathematics. Normally in China, the knowledge points should be 300. And other adaptive learning companies in US, they break down from 300 to 30,000. And what we have done is we break down from 300 to 30,000. It's really, really tiny, really, small pixels, because we want the students to save time, to only learn very tiny learning parts points that they have not mastered. And for example, addition and subtraction of fractions. This is one of the knowledge points. This layer 1. And we have the layer 2 that we have already break down. And then layer 3. And then we have 9 layers for each different knowledge point. We believe that students should not only learn the knowledge points, but also mode of thinking, capacity, and methodology. So I really agree with Connor before, yes. So we should learn like imagination, how to build up our own skills. And we also did breakdown for mode of thinking, capacity, and methodology. For example, in physics, we can have different kind of thinking, yeah, and different like math and Chinese. And this is the content map. So we have a combination of all the multimedia contents. And yeah, this one example I will just finalize. So 3 students, they have the same mastery of the knowledge points, 80%, they have all mastered, but they have different weaknesses. This is the first student. The red ones means they have not mastered. And the second student, they have different color of the red points. And the third students, they have different weaknesses. So all the students are different. They should not be sitting in the same classroom, study. And then this is another project we work with Stanford Research Institute. So yeah, I won't go really further, but for us, we believe that AI will definitely save lots of time for the students, and 80% of the time, and the students should focus on some other activities and classes. And then the most important thing that the students should be engaged in study. They should love study. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jolene. So yeah, now can we hear from you, Sarah, at Brism, about your take on that question of how AI will change the future of education?
Right. So at Prism, that's the name of the product that we've created. We look at the other side of when you're out of your education system, when you enter the professional environment, you still have to learn stuff. And how do we empower people to learn the right stuff at the right time, at the same time as having to remain productive in their jobs? So you have 2 options. Either you try to do an evening course and sort of virtually go back to school, or your employer sends you to a training course. In both situations, it's a huge time investment. And how do you measure the outcome, and how do you make sure that you learn exactly what you need? So our approach to AI applied to the professional education is to use our AI-driven platform to do 3 things. We call it our 3 A's. So we automate the content organization, so you can drag and drop content, and instead of creating curricula that one size fits all, and it's very linear and probably not adapted to most people, you trust that you have enough content to cover the subjects that your employees are interested in, and the engine organizes it in a multidimensional space. That multidimensional space allows us to do the second A, which is adaptive learning. So now that you don't have a preset linear learning journey, you can use a machine learning engine to drive each and individual learner to what content is most relevant to them, based on what they need to learn, yes, but also what they're ready to learn on their pre-existing competencies. And then the final A is analytics. Often what we see in e-learning, apart from low completion rates, which should be addressed by the first 2 A's, is that you get a pass rate, like a threshold. Oh, even if you click randomly, you know that you've passed 60%, and here's your certificate. But is that a real acceptable return on learning? We believe that it isn't, so we analyze exactly what you know, so that you can be confident in your own acquisition of knowledge and skills, and your employer is more inclined to invest in that experience for you because they know exactly what return they get in the workplace. And also because it's in the cloud, you do it on demand, and it's in workflow integrated. So we believe that AI can help, yes, in the schools, but also once we leave the schools, to keep up with new technologies, to keep up with restructuring companies, to keep up with moving jobs, to always stay at the top of what we can do.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And then just finally, Olivier, can you tell us a bit about your work at 42 and how that's responding to how the world is now?
Well, Actually, I do love seeing that AI can bring such kind of hope for change into education. What we did in 42 was actually in the not in the opposite way, but using another way. If you do not know 42, we are an IT school located in Paris. Our students are 18 years old plus, and we train our students to be part of the IT professional world. But we are doing this with a very specific pedagogical model. We do not have any teacher. We do not have any lecture. Our students are facing software development challenges. They need to create a piece of software. And to do that, they need to learn how to search for information, how to filter this information, and make some tests, try to figure out which information is true, false, irrelevant, completely outdated, because technology evolves at a rapid pace. And so our students need to verify all of this. Usually they can do this alone. That's why we call our pedagogical model peer learning. Our students need to collaborate. They need to debate between themselves to create some collective intelligence and then find new hypotheses to test. All of this process work in a completely gamified approach of the curriculum. Our students will try again a failed project. Our students will unlock the next project into the curriculum when they succeed. They will earn some experience points. They will have some badges, some quests. They will go through different levels. And they progress at their own pace, on their own path. So from the beginning, almost the beginning, 6 years ago, we already had in mind this individualized path for education, and for us it's something that makes sense. For us it's something that gives more freedoms to the students and help them to not only develop IT skills, but also what we think that other skills that we think that are mandatory to face an unknown future is problem solving, collaboration skills, creativity, self-learning, and we think it's very important for our students. And we first started from this point, from this perspective of education, thinking that the previous academic education was designed for the previous industrial revolution, and now we need something different into education. And right now, with all this AI coming, we are realizing that AI will help us to have more individualized, more autonomous curriculum for our students, and also to have more individually adaptive learning process for our students. So AI is something that completely makes sense in our way of learning, in our learning context.
Thank you, Olivier. So what I'd like to do in a second is to invite maybe 3 questions from the audience that we'll try to include in our panel discussion. But I'm going to kick it off with a question of my own. So as you have all been speaking, I think 2 big questions have emerged that you referenced, Conrad, in your talk, and that have come out in what you guys have also been speaking of. And those are, first of all, what is it that we should be learning in this new era in which we exist, in which technologies are ubiquitous, AI is emerging, the internet is everywhere. And then secondly, how does that shape or change how we should learn, whether that's thinking about the role that tech might play within an education so we learn how to use it, or it might play in tutoring us in the future. So those are, I think, the 2 big questions that are thrown up. And I'd like to begin with the first one. So based on your experiences, what is it that you feel we should be learning if we're to be successful in today's world? And I want to start with you, Conrad, on this one. So when I saw that you were talking about computational thinking, my initial feeling was that you were talking about learning to think like a computer. But actually, as I heard you speak, it's actually learning to think with computers. Can you explain a little bit about where that thinking emerged from you?
I mean, in the end, if you look at computational, if you look at the whole space that you're trying to cover with sort of technical thinking, it's to solve problems. We're trying to solve problems. We're trying to make better decisions about life. The question is, how do we do that? Now, before you have machinery to help you with that, you're just doing it, the best systems of thinking you can achieve with your head, in various ways. You might do it individually, you might collaborate, you might do different aspects of that. The machine, it's like the machine has a particular part of this that extends a particular direction of what can be done massively beyond, but it's very different. It's like, it's like when people first tried to make planes, they tried to have things that flap their wings. It just turns out that it's not very easy to do that. It's easy to make a plane that works differently. And computers are a bit like that. I mean, it's like, when you're thinking, computers think differently on the whole. The big challenge that we have coming forward is, how can we optimize the hybrid human-computer model to get better decisions? I mean, that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to achieve. And it's not easy, right? Because, for example, take a recent, horrific event, the Boeing 737 MAX. That's an example where you've got automation in the machine. The question is, how does the human interact with the automation? And can that coexist in a sensible way? You've got similar problems coming up with self-driving cars and the way that, once the car completely drives itself, that's one thing. If you start interacting, getting the human to forget about driving for 30 seconds and not, then you have all sorts of other problems. So that's true in many walks of life. And by the way, on the plane front, how you interact with a highly automated plane has been incredibly successful. And one of the ways that's been done is through gaining lots of experience. You need to gain experience of the real situation. Done with simulators on planes. Extremely successful. We need to do much more of that in education. But don't pick simple problems. Pick real, hard, fuzzy, difficult, messy problems with hair all over them. Get the students to interact with those. They'll seem more real to the student as well, because they won't be some abstract problem they don't care about. They'll be to do with their lives if you pick them right, or they pick them. And move forward like that without trying to strip out the interesting complexity.
And Olivier, at 42, students are also learning somewhat to solve problems. What are the things that you're hoping that they're learning there at 42? Because I think it's more than just learning how to code, right?
Yes, it's definitely some problem solving. We need to have students that will be able to launch their career in a sustainable way. So if in 5 years or in 10 years they need to train again to get some new IT skills, I think we definitely fail. So we design the pedagogical process to not only put our students in front of technical problems and for them to learn how to solve this problem, but also to indeed develop a more generic problem-solving issues, more general collaboration problems and situations they will face in their own job. We want them to get an agile state of mind to face whatever the future will bring to us. I think it's definitely mandatory, and if at some point some of them can also have enough freedom to be part of the pioneer to the people who will develop and create what the future will be, we'll be glad to have such kind of students too.
Thanks, Olivier. And Sarah, you had a view on what we should be learning today in this digital era that we live in.
So if I had to choose something to describe the most crucial skill that I foresee being the most powerful in the future of the workplace is how to learn, right? So it does start at school. If you're taught to just accept information and download information from a single teacher, that doesn't necessarily train you to learn on your own, right? How to find information, how to digest it and how to put it into practice. So I really appreciate the model that you guys are running at 42 and how Squirrel can also help students sort of self-organize their learning. So I think that in the future, what we need to be ready to do is reskill, be agile. Again, that's a really good term to describe it. And basically understand that we don't need to learn everything that we think we're going to need in the next 20 years. We don't train anymore for a profession in university and stay in that job for 20 years. We have to learn what we need to do in the next few years and then be ready to reskill, upskill, and find that information. And I think that AI can help us navigate the sea, the ocean of data that is overwhelming us everywhere. It used to be very easy to find what you need and what you think you need on a Google search, for example. Nowadays, if you stick to the top 3 ranks, you know that you are missing out, so you have to dig more and more and more and more. And that's where AI is helping us manage that overwhelming amount of data that we've been producing in the last 2-3 years.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'd love to now quickly see if there are 2 questions that we can try and incorporate. That was the first hand up, and then let's go right at the very back in the coat. So what's your question, sir?
Yeah, it's Matteo. The question is, obviously what you're saying is very interesting, very applicable, but a lot of it is learning in front of a screen in the keyboard. Mm-hmm. So how do you put the human interactions, living a society, and so on and so forth, within this new way of educating?
Great question. We'll incorporate that in a second. And right at the back.
First of all, I want to introduce my identity here. I'm a researcher in education, and I'm also a researcher in media and communications. And my question starts from the fixing education for the AI age. That means there's something problematic about education, which we need to address. However, I feel that we are missing context here. I'm also a teacher. The problems of education do not necessarily have to do with AI. The problems with education are the fact that they're being underfunded, and most importantly, the way we shape citizens. So my question to you is, where beyond this learnification and skillification discourse, where does pedagogy fit into shaping citizens for a democratic society that we're missing nowadays?
Great question. Okay, so I'm hopeful that we can fit answers to both those questions into our responses. And I'm going to start, Jolene, with you to kind of get the view of how, what is the role that AI is playing in changing what education looks and feels like in China specifically? Like, where's the opportunity that you're seeing? How is AI influencing what's happening there?
Okay. Well, in China, it's a little bit different because most of the parents, they want their kids to be, the top of the country, and there's always competition. But all the teachers are only in the very good cities like Beijing, Shanghai. And so most of the students, I could say 90% of the students in China, they could not access very good quality of education. And so with AI, actually, at the very beginning with internet, everyone could access onto the internet looking for what you need. But it's always very hard to find the most suitable learning contents for yourself, for the kids. So with AI, what we are doing is personalized. We can change the insights, so we can spread out with the AI system, and then find out what's the most suitable learning contents for the kids. So the students can access to AI system anywhere in China. And also, there's so many poor, really, really poor areas in China. There are schools, they're in a very, very small house, and one teacher is teaching from year 1 to year 6. So even though they have internet, they have computer, but they don't have teaching resources. So we donate our AI system, but in the future, we're gonna, try to help all these remote areas. So the teachers have a tool, have an AI system to help them to, teach the students. So our goal is to really have all the students anywhere in China to access to really good quality of education and the most suitable ones.
But part of your model also involves keeping human teachers involved in the process. Why have you made that decision?
Because we are human beings. We always need human beings, for sure. So we will not say that there will be no teachers in the future. Teachers are always there. And at least 20 to 30%, depends on the students' feel. And we need encouragement. We need emotional, and even we need, skin touching, hugging, and monitoring. So human teachers are there. It's just a changing of the roles for human teachers.
And Sarah, in the model that you're working with, what is the role of human agents with that compared to the tech that may be doing some of the diagnostics?
So first of all, I would like to put a little bit of context to why I'm here today. So we're not trying to fix education on all fronts, but we have expertise on one aspect of technology, which is AI, and we're trying to explore how this could take part into the bigger effort in adapting education nowadays. So the question was about the element of the human teacher and mentor. In school, there is no question that we need the human guidance, the human pedagogy, the human mentorship. It's the same in the workplace. The problem that our teachers are facing today is that they are overcapacity. We're asking more and more of them. We're asking them to work after hours, marking, preparing, and managing all sorts of different situations arising in one class of 20 to 30 students. And it's just too much for one person. And funding is a big issue. When you cannot find the funds to increase the number of teachers, what we can bring from the technology aspect of things is bring the capacity to do things at more scale. So you can drive the machine, but still use the machine without it replacing you. And in the workplace, there is no difference, in my opinion.
And Olivier, in the model of education that 42 is using, what is the combination between human interactions and human-machine interactions in education? And do you think that that could be a model that could be applied more widely across education systems?
I would say that our students spend almost half of the time in human relation. There was a question about relationship in education. I'm in higher education in France. I'm not sure that a teacher in university in front of hundreds of students have a real connection with every one of each of the students. My students in 42, they need to collaborate. And they discover that during the selection process. If they do not collaborate, if they do not talk to each other, if they do not debate, they will fail, they won't be selected. So they very early discover that it's definitely mandatory because they cannot solve everything by themselves. So I think that we are creating a learning context that improve regarding what we have right now in public education. I think that it improves a little bit collaboration, and they will have also collaboration groups that match the size of the people and the group and the kind of collaboration they will have also in companies. So I think it makes sense. Probably it can be increased, and we are an IT school run by IT guys. We are not specialists, definitely, in communication and collaboration, and probably we can improve this a lot. But I think we are already somehow better than other curriculum in higher education in France.
Thanks, Olivier. Conrad, can I pass that question to you?
I mean, particularly to the point at the back, we have many things to do to fix education, not just the things, for example, I was talking about or we've been talking about. I mean, I think just a few things to point to here. One is we've got to relook at our outcomes that we're expecting from education. And, you know, to be fair, there's been a lot of work on this around the world in different aspects. But those outcomes need to be much more general than some of the outcomes that we have specified in each subject. You know, how to collaborate, how to do things. And my view of this is we should be much more explicit about outcomes we want, even if the outcomes we want, you know, have a much more general nature, if that makes sense. So that's one issue. Another thing that relates to that is assessments. Unfortunately, in the ecosystem of education, assessments currently drive everything, at least at school, around the world. And the more pressure we put on assessments to judge, the more the assessments force the subjects to be more collimated into these sort of quantitative ways to view things. I have this expression I sometimes say, which is in the world that you know, numbers have assumed an importance beyond their ability to judge, or quantification in some cases. And that's exactly happened with these assessments. And so if you want, you know, you want lots of open-ended interaction, lots of problem solving that isn't, you know, a multiple choice question. But you also then want to say, hey, I can judge this person against this person and get an outcome. And those two are somewhat incompatible in the current state of the ecosystem. There are ways to solve that. That's another talk. So I think that the assessment mustn't be driving the ecosystem in its current form. The ecosystem has got stuck, and I think governments and others can set up the ecosystem better to allow real innovation, but we've got to then have a proper discussion as to what the outcomes really are that we want.
If I may, regarding AI into education, I've met a lot of teachers from primary school or high school, and for them it looks like that AI or IT in general, digitalization, is a trend and they can't just ignore it. So maybe it's not the best way, definitely it's not the only way, but I think that digitalization or AI using IT in a classroom, using AI in a classroom, can be a kind of Trojan horse to bring all new practice into the classroom. But it will be probably different from one classroom to another.
Thanks, Olivier. And so, anyone who's had any experience being a teacher, or in fact probably being a student in school, knows that eventually at the end of the lesson you run out of time and wish that you could carry on and forget to have set the homework and do all those kinds of things. And I'm afraid that we have reached that point now. However, I would just like to end by saying one thing, which is I think that education is often, as a field, hugely underlooked. But for me, it's by far the most important thing for us to invest in, because the minds that are in school right now are those that will go on to create the technologies of the future. And so I think we always have to think about making that long-term plan. And I think that our four panelists today are very much at the forefront of thinking about these two big questions that we have to wrestle with, which are, what should we be learning today? And how might these new technologies that we have change the way that we do learn? So I'd like to say a really big thank you and encourage you to look more into the work of each of our panelists, to Conrad, to Olivier, to Sarah, and to Jolene, and their organizations and companies, because I think you'll find it a very, very rich experience, which will give you lots of food for thought about those two things. So a big, big thank you to our panelists.
Do visit our stand under the impact stage, I think, which will have the demos I couldn't show you. Thanks.
Okay, so thanks very much. Big round of applause for our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, before I invite our speakers to leave the stage, can we have another huge round of applause, chaired so brilliantly, I think, by Alex Beard. Well done. Thank you. I mean, we're on the tip of the iceberg. We could have done this for 2 or 3 hours, and I'm so sorry we had so little time, but absolutely brilliant. We have an invention at CogX. If you'd like to meet our speakers with their blessing, do, like the end of a wedding, come down the aisle to see Daisy holding aloft an orange lollipop, and you get to meet them face to face. So you have a multiple choice now, CogXers. You can meet our speakers as they start to leave the stage, and please do that at the back with Daisy. Of course, you're free to go and explore CogX, and if you'd like to stay, we're going to be doing a knockout session at 11 o'clock all around the future of work, and specifically, how do we make work easier using AI? So whatever your choice, you're very welcome. One final thank you to all of our speakers, led out by Conrad Wolfram. How would we design a curriculum assuming commuters exist? One of the most interesting bombshells of the morning. Thank you. Round of applause. Thank you. Right, now come on down, guys. Do. Fascinating, and I know that each and every one of you have come here for a reason. We're going to be talking about the future of work. Now, on this stage, we've had Conrad Wolf from here this morning saying, oh, by the way, you're going to love this if you weren't here. He said, let's design a curriculum that assumes computers exist. Let's design a curriculum that assumes computers exist. What a cool thought. Now, my next guest up here, followed by a panel to talk about the future of work and how we make it easier, is an entrepreneur. Sachin Dev Dugal, what can I say? He's the founder of Engineer.ai, and fundamentally, they are, as you will hear, changing the way software is built. Something he would be too modest to say is they raised in October Europe's largest ever Series A round of $30 million, so a big tank of fuel to get them through an extraordinary journey. Please welcome the founder of Engineer.ai, also known as Builder, Sachin Dev Dugal. Thank you.
Ideas are what drive innovation in the world. We're on a journey. Empower everyone.
I come from a world of dreamers, and they see the future. Most of them are not coders.
They find the access to technology or developed software very burdensome and complicated.
There are lots of people you see around in the world who have great ideas. Very few ideas actually get implemented.
They don't have the technical know-how, they don't have the resources to afford what they want to build.
It seems to be this foregone conclusion that you have to be an engineer to build software today. Our pure purpose is to let everyone take the idea in their head to the thing in their hand, without needing to know how, or without having to deal with all the headaches that are associated.
We're going to help you build your app, and we're going to make it as easy as
additional features, and it simply then gets delivered.
The AI is really smart and it's suggestive. It asks you what you want to build. It asks you a little bit about what your inspiration is, what your ideas are.
It's the ability to use the collective knowledge of what has been built before.
It's even going to start thinking about who you are, what you might like.
And then customize that with human coaching.
We are building products which are like twice as fast, 1/3 the price, and quality which is as bespoke as possible for a customer.
This is fusion of human-assisted AI.
It is your partner for life because it will keep it up to date for every platform. It will deliver all of the cloud-based and other services that make the app run seamlessly.
The teacher with an app idea to change the way we educate students.
The wine owner who wants to develop an app to deliver wine to your door.
From the little girl who wants to build a Pinterest for butterflies to the Uber for ski instructors. Creators, streamers, students, entrepreneurs can now see their idea truly transform.
Software transcends everything from that little girl to the big organization.
Anything that you can possibly think of, we can create it for you. There's nothing that we can't do.
We're a generation of builders, and we think that's going to just fundamentally shift the way the world works.
What do you want to build?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So this is more like an intimate chat, which is great. Feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. Presentation. So we come from this belief that people shouldn't be shackled away from being able to build ideas, whether it's improving their business, whether it's coming up with something to help their household, their business plan project, whatever it is they're trying to do. We feel that everyone should be empowered to build whatever that idea is without ever having to worry about technology, just like you get on a plane and you don't have to worry about how it flies, or you get in a car and you don't understand the engine mechanics. So let's meet Alex. It's a really good example of one of our customers. Alex is a dentist. Alex is very good at making sure your teeth are clean, your teeth are healthy. Alex runs a clinic of 4 different dentist practices. But Alex wants to build software so that when you're at home, your dentist is in touch with you. Alex wants to make sure that whenever you want to get an appointment, you get one of his best people, depending on what your appointment's for. Alex really wants to build Uber for dentists and wants it to grow beyond his own practices. Alex doesn't really understand technology. It's probably the hardest thing he's done in his life. And so Alex came to Builder and used our platform to be able to build Uber for dentists without having to write a line of code or speak to a single developer. There are many people like Alex. In 2017, just over $500 billion was spent by small, medium businesses building bespoke software.
That was the first year it eclipsed enterprise outsourcing, which is about 460 billion. And this could be the whiz kid, the mother working from home, it could be the lifestyler, it could be a number of people that have got ideas. How many of us have met a friend that had an idea at coffee? Right? And then we met them 2 weeks later, and then the idea was no more. And so we realized that 90% of ideas don't really go past the stage of the idea because it's just so difficult. And so when we think about, well, it's great, you can think about entrepreneurs, you can think about dreamers, you can think about people that, are thinking of these ideas. But these people exist in all parts of the economy. Because fundamentally, the old way of benchmarking the digital economy and the non-digital economy sort of was last decade. Today, the economy is split into 4 types of companies. There are tech companies, there are software first, there are software powered, and then there are everyone that are still to be digitally native. And tech companies we know about, people like Facebook and Google. Software first are folks like Uber, where the core service is not software, but without software you wouldn't buy the product. Software powered is the winery. You're not going to buy from one winery versus another just because they have a better app, but you may be detracted from buying it. So what we're seeing is that across all stages of a company, there are people that now need to build software. Why is that? The real reason is most of our customers are straddling 2 fears. They're straddling the fear of irrelevance and the fear of failure. When you think about this part of the graph, these are people that are product managers, marketing managers, campaign managers, finance managers, human resource people. They're all trying to build software or build ideas to stay relevant in their workplace. When you think about categories 3 and 4, these are actually the small, medium businesses that are trying to come up with ideas. Could be the Uber for ski instructors. It could be the audience participation app for the BBC that was designed by the producer of the show, not by central IT. But for all of these people, it's really hard work. Building software is probably the hardest thing most people do in their entire life after university. I think exams is probably a little bit harder. And we can see that, right? It's not just a myth. 78% of software, 78% of the money that was spent in 2017 was basically flushed down the toilet. $400-something billion, 4 times Vision Fund was wasted on people trying to build software that didn't ever make it to production. And why is that? Well, there's a lack of trust in supply. You pay a deposit, then you're beholden to the seller. People don't know how to spec. In fact, that's the hardest problem. 90% of people can't go past the stage of an idea because they just don't understand how to produce a 20-page document that says my idea means this. We've had so many customers that say, I want to build an app like this, which is usually the taxonomy. My app is like Uber or my app is like Yelp. Even the US Air Force, the CIO of the US Air Force, I remember this conversation. I want to build Yelp for base services. And they expect you to understand what 90% of the definition means by just that one line. So then they'll focus on what they're really unique about their idea. And so when you think about that problem and the challenges, it's also not just about building. It's about building, running, and letting companies scale that idea. And so it's not just about producing the code, but it's really about making sure that it runs forever. Because software is like milk. It decays. It just takes a longer period of time. And so you have to continuously update it. You have to continuously fix it. But for the person that didn't even want to build it in the first place, didn't really want to come onto it in the first place, it's a tall order to ask them to start maintaining it now. And so we've created this turnkey platform that combines over 500 building blocks of reusable code. So how many people have used an app with Facebook login? Right? How many people use more than one app with Facebook login? And the point is, why is it developers rewrite the same code again and again? Why do designers design the same thing again and again? How many ways can you design a login button? How many ways can you design a map view? What we've created is distilled out 500 building blocks. We've put it onto an assembly line. And then we're connecting it to 75,000 creators around the world that actually work for 130 dev shops. So we're buying elastic supply of capacity, much like Uber's drivers. And we're connecting it to demand that's globally geo-distributed, but making sure that the end-to-end process is really streamlined. And there's some sort of credibility to our story. We bootstrapped the company for 4 years. We've probably done about 60 million, or now probably 75 million in aggregate revenue over that period of time. We've been profitable since year 1. And we were very fortunate to raise a decent Series A. But really what's important is we've been able to deliver to everyone from Universal Music, the Roots, the US Air Force, through to, I kid you not, the little girl who wanted to build Pinterest for butterflies. And that shows you the diversity of where ideas come from. And a lot of this sort of, to me, was built on a fundamental set of key lessons as we think about the future of work and how entrepreneurship grows and changes. And one of them is really understanding where our customer is. And I was a huge physics favorite when I was in school, so I love doing graphs. But really, most of our customers are in this situation. They start off with a fear of irrelevance. I don't want to be irrelevant. Who here wants to be irrelevant? No one. And so if you don't want to be irrelevant, you usually come up with an idea to stay relevant. As you get closer to this line of fear, you realize that the fear of failure far exceeds the fear of irrelevance. And you enter this thing called inertia, and you just don't move. Most of our customers keep yo-yoing here. And what we're trying to get them to do is escape velocity, get past that line of fear. And the problem is that unlike other things, when you start a business, you buy a PC, you buy software, it's instant gratification. We're the Facebook generation. It's push notifications and instant feeling. Building software, you don't see anything for 10 weeks. And so you start off, you paid the money, you did all the hard work, and then it's 10 weeks of silence. And then you have all the issues that kick in. So a part of what we understood is how do we create enough emotion through the entire process that we keep them above this line of fear. The other one was really understanding our demand strength. So just in the US alone, on a limited set of keywords, almost 800,000 people were searching for keywords to build bespoke software in the small, medium business category. About 70,000, 65,000 showed refined intent. 13,000 people made a purchase. That's staggering. In the US alone, that means last month, some $350 million was spent building custom software by small, medium businesses on a limited set of keywords. If you sort of extrapolate that from the data we have worldwide, we're thinking about $7 to $8 billion worth of purchase just on a limited set of keywords. But really, when you think about the fact that 90% of people don't go past the stage of an idea, and the future of work is about people being able to own ideas, the market size is so much bigger. It's more like $7 trillion a year. And I think the final part is really understanding your scaling machine. And so we've really focused on what makes this impactful. How do we fundamentally create something that moves the future of work forward? And a part of them is if we could allow 10,000 people at any given point in time to build ideas and do it in a way that was scalable, cost-effective, and efficient, that's enough to make a punch to how people think about what their work really is, whether they continue to be employed or whether they do something on themselves. And I think with many cases, especially in our case, it's never a top of the funnel problem. It's a middle of the funnel problem. It's how do you deliver this stuff at scale? Because it's quite easy just to build a very large software development company with 1 million people to do that. But that's not scalable or efficient in long term. And you have to think about where your customer is not a celebrity, but your customer is your hero, the person that's actually being able to showcase how they move forward. So we have this particular customer, actually, companies called Muirhead, and wanted to build something that allowed people to track their behavior and their feelings so that they felt better in the day. And fascinating story, but the guy would have never built this had he gone to a normal dev shop environment, had failed twice going down that route. And I'd say the last thing sort of from our own lesson was we were really focused on building a business that obviously turned a profit, but delivered impact as well, rather than just building a project that we were going to sell to someone. And please come and see our site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sachin. This is fascinating. Your mission is sort of very humble and grassroots in terms of changing the way the software gets built. But what is your wildest ambition for the company?
I think at 10,000 concurrent projects, which we think is about 4 years away, we've become the largest single producer of software.
Amazing.
And allowing, producer to people that have ideas.
Fantastic. Sachin, will you stay and join our
yes,
panel,
please?
Please,
so
thank
much.
you. Please, have a seat. Once again, Sachin, thank you so much from Engineer.ai and Builder. One tiny switch. I was hoping Jen Heen would join us from Vixen Labs, which is absolutely brilliant in terms of voice recognition. You can meet Jen at another point. But I'm delighted to welcome up our next panel to sort of explore this subject a bit more. And they're going to be led up by Ian McGill, who runs Open Ops, by the way. And he's got an eye on the globe, by the way, because this is about government tenders around the world. So please welcome Ian, who will introduce the rest of the panel. Well done, Ian.
Thank you, everyone. So, as was just said, my name's Ian McGill. I run OpenOps.com, and we've heard from Sachin. And I'm just going to give the rest of the panel, so Phil and Justin, Phil from Filament and Justin from GDIL, to just do a little introduction about their businesses and how they use technology, particularly AI. And then from there, we'll start talking a little bit about the future and what the future might look like. And I'm going to try and provide some pushback somewhere along the line. So, Phil, do you want to get started?
Yeah, thanks very much, and great talk session. My name's Phil Wescott. I am the CEO of a company called Filament AI. We've been running for around 3 years, operating out of London and Toronto, providing AI professional services to enterprise. So we help enterprise build their AI capability, and we essentially take them from data study, from models, from ML, all the way up to building an application that delivers value. And that vertical stack is something that all enterprise are struggling with at the moment. And frankly, it's a 20% data science problem, and it's an 80% engineering problem. So very much looking forward to the panel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Fitzpatrick. I'm the co-founder and CEO of GDIL. GDIL is a company intelligence platform, so we use data to tell the story behind every business. And what that entails is basically bringing together billions of data points on tens of millions of companies every day to build that into a knowledge graph and really contextualize the relationships that exist around a company, directors, and shareholders. So a lot of the problem that we solve is very much geared towards applications of machine learning and AI, and being able to not just link together disparate data sets, but also create derivative data that gives new meaning to that information.
Thank you. So it's really, the title of this panel is around the future of work. And I think, broad as a subject that is, it's quite interesting to think about how our lives, the notion that you actually get into an office, I think, is disappearing very rapidly. When you log on, you start your work, how our lives are going to be changed by technology and by AI over the next few years, I think is a really at the core of what we're trying to do. So I know, from example, in OpenOps, we really want to progress with personalization so that, you don't, at the minimal effort, you get the right opportunities direct into your inbox without actually even having to type in a keyword, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to ask each of the panel members where they think technology will take the future of people's work over the next few years. Sachin, can I start with you?
So, when we always think about software, we never think of software as the cottage industry. Up to now, software development's been a cottage industry. It's sort of groups of people that work together on a big problem, and they're through the whole process. Every other cottage industry has been industrialized. And what has that meant? It's meant the repetitive work's been removed. Customization has become not an infinite game, but one of many, which feels like infinity, but is not infinity. You've created specialists that are detailed and in-depth thinkers about specific areas, and not generalists that can build the soup to nuts of a car. And so as we think about how our business works and sort of what we're doing in that development ecosystem, we see the same parallels happening in other places, which is things that were repeated, almost sort of paper pushing or just workflow-driven pieces of work. Those jobs will fall to automation. At the same time, there's an ever-increasing amount of work that's coming in for more skilled, more higher value, more top of the stack. And just in software development itself, if you think about 90% of people who have ideas and don't build it, and suddenly now, even if 10% more are building it, you've got double the demand. And so you have to have some of it go to automation. So I don't think it's an AI is going to eat everyone's lunch problem. I think it's going to be a shift up the stack, which has actually happened throughout the last 200 years.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to use the example of Sachin's client earlier, the dentist. And I think dentists are probably some of the most entrepreneurial people on the planet, because I've had about 3 of them come up to me with this great idea in baking AI into their surgery or their supply chain or their outbound marketing. What's interesting is where you're helping them to be an entrepreneur and build an engineering application, we're helping them to turn their expertise into machine learning models, which is then baked into that application. So not only does it allow, the patient experience walking into a dentist surgery to be kind of alive with technology and, conversational interfaces, being able to source knowledge and information about their particular medical conditions, but also it's able to tap into data sets and personalization and all the capabilities that AI unlocks from your personal data and the broader data around dentistry. And that's just one industry, and it's transforming as we speak. So yeah, let's remember this is not just about big enterprise. There is a whole gamut of where AI is influencing work.
I've never heard dentists being referred to as the most entrepreneurial people on the planet. That's good. I'm heartened to hear that. So I think when I think about the future of work, I think about one where there's kind of less toil and drudgery, and I think that there's a tremendous pocket where technology can play there to help reduce the toil and drudgery that we often experience in our day-to-day working lives. We're doing a lot of work in the financial services industry, particularly with banks, insurers, asset finance providers, alternative lenders who have a sort of SME line of business. And what's interesting about those business lines is that they're entirely manual and paper-based, and the turnaround times are measured in days or weeks. So if you want to go and open a bank account for your business with one of the high street banks, it's going to probably take you a few weeks to get through the process. So we partnered with one of our clients and actually did a study in 6 of their branch locations and looked at the tasks that their relationship managers and credit partners were executing on in the process of opening an account and underwriting a loan. And we found that they were spending up to a day and a half of their time every week just doing manual data entry and copying. It was even worse than that because they were sort of copying data that they had already inputted in one place and had to input it into another, right? So, that's obviously a pretty bad way to spend your life, doing data entry repeatedly. But it's also a terrible customer experience. It doesn't scale. It's the businesses are under all kinds of cost pressure, right? So there are all kinds of reasons why you would want to remove that drudgery and toil from the workflow. And as a result of working with them to integrate our API into that customer journey, they took out 25 million pounds of cost. The time to open the account went from weeks down to minutes and hours, depending on how complex the case was. And so, when I think about the application of not just AI and ML, but technology more generally, there's the opportunity to reduce a lot of that drudgery and toil. The question that becomes is, Sachin was saying, you move higher and higher up the skill stack. What do you do with the people who used to be just doing the data entry, and they were happy doing the data entry, right? So I think we have a responsibility, as a society, to kind of ask those questions as well.
So someone the other day I was speaking to was saying, broadly, actually AI is pretty easy to do badly. It's really easy to do it badly, and it's virtually impossible to do it really well. And that sort of chimed with something else that I learned this week, which was that 85% of banks in the US still, the mainframes are mainly using COBOL. So do we end up creating, and this is the pushback really, do we end up creating these models that kind of work really well in 80 or 90% of the cases, but we got this long tail of stuff that doesn't get solved. And then we embed that in our systems, and in 40 years' time, someone's still going to be going, oh yeah, it uses Python NLTK from Python 3, and we're all sat there laughing. Is that where we're going to be? I'll start with you, Justin.
I don't know. I guess I'm kind of wondering how much of a problem that is from the perspective of, I don't think the goal should be to kind of automate everything and always have the latest, the latest release of whatever built into our, our operating model. So, that to me is really where you see this, kind of partnership. Not that we're going to all be shaking hands with robots, but that partnership between, technology and humans. And there was, Gary Kasparov wrote a book that was released a year or two ago, and it's funny because I was reading this book, and he's obviously talking about his experience playing against Deep Blue and the kind of evolution of, kind of chess playing computers and things like that. And at the end of the book, he goes, yeah, and they've cracked chess, which is complex, but it can be solved with brute force. When will AI ever solve a problem like, a game like Go? And you're kind of like, the book was published 2 years ago, and sort of feels out of date. But the point in raising that was that, he gives this example that, machines have been better than humans at chess for a while, but humans and machines are better than machines at chess. And so I think that's really where you start to see this opportunity for, people leveraging technology to do higher value and more powerful, solve more powerful problems.
So, Sachin, I'd come to you on this. So, are we baking in problems for the future in the decisions you're making now? Or do you see it all as upside?
I think it's the severity of the problem you're solving, right? So most AI systems will fall into 3 categories. They're either in the loop, out of the loop, or above the loop. So in the loop is like the machine really can't do anything except recommend. Out of the loop is it does it autonomously, but you would never do that for like cancer treatment or flying an airplane entirely on its own. And then there's above the loop, which is that it sort of audit 10% and then feed that back in and it makes an adjustment. I think problems need to have the right solution. I also think that when we think about AI as folks that are in the industry, we think about machine learning, we think about prediction. When we think about AI as sort of just a population, it's become sort of synonymous with anything that's automated and has perceived intelligence. And going back to that example of, you could do 100 iterations and it feels like infinite. And so I think the broader question is, where do we use technology to automate or redefine how we've done something? And is there enough sort of a risk-reward ratio for doing that? And I think that's been the same old adage for the last 30, 40 years. And we've seen in some places like operating traffic, flying planes through waypoints, it will do a better job. It doesn't get tired. But in other areas, and I think to your point, we shouldn't just do it for the sake of doing it. And I think as a civilization, we have the risk and tendency to do things for the sake of doing them, without necessarily sort of feeling the impact much later.
And Phil, so you must have situations where you're talking to a client and they say, oh, I've got this amazing vision and I want to do this, and you probably have to say we're not going to be able to do that. We can't do that. So how do you broach the limits of AI, and how do you deal with the challenges of actually saying that this, with the amount of data you've got or with the infrastructure you've got, we just can't do that?
Yeah, I mean, most clients have been, let's remember, on a journey of improving. It's not like they're only starting now with the onset of AI. And the last decade has seen RPA has been the main way in automating processes within enterprise. And that has really tackled the issue you've made there, that the systems of record...
Sorry, can I come back? RPA?
Robotic process automation. And depending on who you ask for a definition of AI, that's either in or not. But AI is a broad church, right? Now, RPA has been solving the issue between systems of record and systems of engagement. Systems of record in banks in particular are very difficult to alter, very expensive to alter. But what it gives you is a methodology to kind of broach that gap. And the RPA vendors, the Blue Prisms, the UiPaths, very much target that. Now, that's process automation, but it is limited in its ability to automate process that start to get a bit more complex. And that's why it's a big industry in its own right. It's a $3 billion industry, RPA. But AI and machine learning, natural language processing technologies, is a 20 billion industry. So what you can start doing is making huge transformational changes to productivity. And I'll give you an example that's very close to Justin's called clientele, because we actually are a user of due deal data in some of our projects. And we can talk about the ecosystem of value, the value chain in a moment. But it is helping a private equity firm to transform the way in which they do origination of deals. So it's using the insight about small companies to identify which companies suit their investment thesis. And that's allowing them to double the amount of assets under management in a year with the same origination team. So that's not an RPA tweaking a process, incremental improvements. That's doubling the productivity of their deal origination. So that's an example of where the industry is at the moment and the opportunities.
That's very interesting. And yeah, to sort of, I can imagine doubling the productivity of your team. Would be wonderful, wouldn't it? So I'm just thinking, one of the things that, I wrote an article recently on our blog about AI in procurement, and there's this double-edged sword with all AI, and one of the possibilities is that it would be really easy to respond to tenders. You could automate the generation of text. But equally, corrupt buyers could generate specifications that they would know would probably end up with a contract being awarded to a particular supplier. So they could use AI and neural networks to predictively tweak the specification so that there was only going to be one winner, and it would be really hard to spot that. And it just, so since we're at CogX, where is the line, do you see? Where is that double-edged sword element in the work that you do that makes you worry as well as be enthusiastic about the future?
So we have a really funny example of this. So we work with 132 dev shops in 12 time zones. So when we launched, it was only 30, and we built a really simple, I wouldn't call it AI, but it was a code analyzer that could basically stack rank code and say, is this guy good or bad, and give it a percentage with some tags. Started noticing, like, how could a guy start with 80% as a score, and then by the first time they do an assignment with us, it's 20% or 25%. We're like scratching our heads saying, it's not the same person, it's not the same person. And we realized was that the Eastern European dev shop were gaming our system. They would get the best person to do the test, and then they'd get other people to do the work. So everyone was scoring so high entering the platform, and then like huge fall in score. And actually, so we ended up building an OR, again, you could call it early stages of AI, an OR-based algorithm that said, oh, we're not just going to look at what you did in your score. We're going to take a picture of your face. We're going to take a picture every 3 minutes you're doing work, between 3 and 7 minutes. You don't even know when it is. But also then we built a parser that could see how stylistically the code was written. So we could say, well, this is not the same style as how you write code. It's not the same person. And so, and the problem was, because we weren't dealing with 10 developers or 50 developers, we have to go manage a workforce which is the size of Infosys for all intents and purposes. But we only have 150 people in the company to manage it. So we have to rely on intelligent and unintelligent automation to be able to manage that workflow. So it's a reverse side of the sort of the contract defeating. We would never be able to operate, and I'll give you another really silly analogy. So if you go to Accenture to build software or build a project, it's 11 weeks before the first line of code is written. Or any with a big software company, I shouldn't say that just about Accenture. We're at 72 hours.
Other SIs are
other
available.
SIs, yes. We're at 72 hours before the first line of code is written. And a part of that is just that ability to procure in an unbiased way can only be done by machine at scale.
Interesting. So, Justin.
Yeah, sure.
Where's that knife edge?
Where's the
for you?
line? Yeah. So one of the real challenges that we help our clients solve is around understanding the true nature of what a business does. So if you walk into most insurers today, they will be classifying risk at a portfolio level based on something like SIC codes. And that's not specific enough because you have 20% of companies in the UK that are basically other right now. So trying to underwrite other is difficult. So we've created a proprietary data set which has 34,000 keywords which get tagged to the business to help describe in really granular detail what that business does. So you could type in SaaS or fintech as a kind of category, or you could go down to the level of almost a product like cider makers or PVC tubing or whatever. So what that allows is obviously a kind of company-specific approach to risk. So if you're an insurer or you're lending to that business, that's great because now you're able to price that risk much more effectively. If you're the government or kind of society at large, one of the aspects of pricing risk on a portfolio level is that you're kind of it's a rule of averages, right? So you're kind of subsidizing. You've got the really good risks in the portfolio subsidizing the really bad risks in the portfolio. So now if you're able to zoom in a much more precise way and figure out whether that company is good or bad, you're able to concentrate more of the resources into the really good companies, and you're basically accelerating the death of the bad ones by starving them from opportunities or pricing them out of the market. So that's kind of neither good nor bad. That just is one of these things that we sort of have to be aware of as a consequence of applying technology in new and different ways. And I'm not advocating that we try and halt the progress of technology or our ability to do this, but it sort of raises different questions, I think, for the banks, for the insurers, for the regulators who have to sort of create something that works for a lot of people. Right?
And subsequent ethical issues societally around who gets employed in good companies versus bad companies and how you identify that up front would be interesting.
Yeah, it's like capitalism, right? Because if you're on a downward trajectory, you're...
It's just that loop of creative destruction just kind of starts spinning quicker.
Yeah. So slightly different take on the risk as it plays out is you've got in the value chain very dominant platforms that are providing the algorithms to all the other industries and the platforms to build their own algorithms, to be fair. You've got data providers who, at least that will always tend to be something unique because either they've built up that database or, they have an unfair advantage. They're a facility that has their own data that no one else is going to take off them. But the platform players can start to dominate even more than they do already. Because if you think about it, they start to own the conversation with the society, with the population, via your Alexas and Google Homes. We partner with both those organizations very effectively, but you can't deny they are starting to dominate all the interfaces to our world. First through our shopping habits and our internet searches, and now with conversational interfaces, they're starting to dominate that as well. So my fear is for individual brands who no longer have a direct relationship with their customers, they will always have to play through one of the platforms. I don't necessarily think that's healthy from a competition standpoint.
Thank you. I'd like to open up questions to the floor. Has anyone got a wonderful panel here? Surely there must be a question.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
I think it's fascinating. I'm an architect. I'm very interested in this.
Could you just tell us who you are and where you come from? Got a microphone?
I'm TSM, Space Age Architects here in London. I'm very interested, obviously, in the digital debate here. One big question for me is, obviously, we touched on this, is as you said, the control of Google and so on. AI, to me, sounds also a bit of a fig leaf, because ultimately, you're collecting data, holding that data, and have algorithms to sort the data. And, so there's nothing sort of super clever about this, but the concentration of power gets stronger and stronger. It's more and more centralized. And I think this is the biggest worry, so that's why there's a fig leaf element, I think, is very, very, in a way, dangerous, really. So I don't see it like an answer to this, really, how you break that. And I really like your idea with the inner loop, side loop, and top loop question, because that really gets to the heart of the whole AI thing. Is that God and the human being obviously can be outside the system, so it can monitor itself, really. And I would be curious, really, whether you can see there is actually something like a human outside the system, conscious or not, at some point. So I don't think so, really. But
would it be fair to summarize that you have grave concerns about consolidation as a result of using platforms that, yeah. So, Justin, do you want to take that on, or I'm not sure there was an actual question.
Take that on. Yeah, it feels like there's a lot to unpack there. Just to kind of zero in on the question more specifically, because I heard something at the end about does AI have the ability to become conscious? Is that sort of where you were going? Yeah. So the first one was the concentration. What thoughts on the concentration of power, or whether those companies are too powerful already?
No, I'm saying that AI is presented to be something very clever, but whereby it's really fitly, really, to concentrate more and more, centralizing, and then you say we're offering something clever, whereby effectively it's just trying to be the cleverest person to get all the data, and then it's a black box, effectively. You don't know what's happening.
I'm going to push back. Justin, I'll come to you in a minute, and to you, Sasha. I'm going to push back slightly on that, because number one, I think AI is actually terrifyingly clever. And I think so if you look at some of the recent academic papers on transfer learning in NLP, you will see some really substantial changes, to the point where with given sort of 4 or 5 tiny bullet points of text, Google's BERT code can actually write a 300-word, 400-word article that is credible from those tiny bits of text and nothing more. And so this idea that we're just sort of like, okay, you're just buying in, pushing data onto servers and running rather ordinary algorithms, I think we're moving away from that, and some of the changes are really accelerating. As for cognizance, I think that's in our judgment. But Justin, have I made things worse or better?
Yeah,
on this one?
I think I like your answer. I think let's stick with that.
I mean, the only thing I would probably add is that I think it's super unfair to just say that it's a marketing trick to get data, which I think is the underlying point of your statement. Fundamentally, if you had petabytes of data and you had to run an if-then algorithm through it, the likelihood is it's going to take a month. The fact that Google can give you a search result in a second is clear that technology has evolved, and it's a step change over time. The fact that today 6 people have to sit together to be able to build software so that they can talk to each other about how each of the modules are going to communicate, and we're building blocks that are auto-sensing, that already know who else is on the block and can communicate with each other. We've just reduced the amount of work that a human engineer needs to do by 30, 40%. That's not incremental evolution. That's not incremental innovation. That's evolutionary. And unfortunately, through history, you've always had protagonists who believe that there is some dark theory around why we're collecting data and what we're doing. And I think that's why there needs to be these fail-safes around in the loop, out of the loop, and above the loop. But the ability for diabetes to be diagnosed through diabetic retinopathy, the ability to do scans of mammary glands to find out breast cancer, just the sheer volume at which we can do it today, that is both visual, image, cognitive, all 3. That is not data and a simple algorithm that was running when we were using punch cards into machines. I think that's being very unfair to where the industry's moved.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there is a bit of an antidote to this dominant story, which is the fact that all organizations, from big enterprises through to your dentist again, there is an opportunity to train and own the IP of your own algorithm. Now, these platforms don't just supply you algorithms off the shelf. They also give you the tools to be able to train your own. And that is something unique about the AI value chain, is that you can own the intellectual property of a machine learning model that you have trained and is trained based on your expertise, whether it's as an investment professional or as a dentist. That can be yours. Now, it means that you can have your part of the value, and no one can take that away from you, because that's based on your training, your annotation, your expertise.
And I think just one last thing to add to that, there's actually a reverse concentration risk, because as you make things cheaper, easier, and less technically required, like go back 50 years, or you'd use punch cards, and you had to read a book to understand which punch card to use, and now you can just come up with an idea and it gets built. You're now going to see a way where people are going to move off the concentrated marketplaces, because they can actually operate on their own. You know, there used to be this want to be in the top 10 apps. Now there's actually a want to be in the 15th to 25th app. That reverse concentration movement is only happening because technology is being automated and being made simpler.
Thank you. One more, well, hopefully we've got time for a couple more questions, but wonderful, a woman. You've got a manel here, so I would love to hear from someone else. Can I find out who you are?
Oh yeah, hello, I'm Shante. I'm from a company called Coty, which is the third biggest beauty company in the world.
Fantastic.
So my question is, how do you feel AI and data is working with apps such as GDPR and ABL? Do you feel like the more data you're collecting, there's a bit of scaremongering happening with data harvesting, and has that affected you in any way? So do people actually know what GDPR is, and the subject access requires around it that doesn't affect you? Or do you think this is going to play a bigger role in years to come around, to your point, around people being a little scared about how much data you actually have on us?
Yeah.
I can take that.
I can swing right over to you, because
so
I know you have data on individual company directors in your data
We
set.
do, yeah. I mean, we have to be GDPR compliant. It's not as much of a concern for us as it would be for, say, Facebook or something like that, because of the nature of the data that we collect, and the majority of information that we collect happens to be, on the company entity as opposed to the individual. But I think, to kind of answer your question, people, I think, are becoming, certainly in Europe anyway, are becoming a lot savvier in terms of understanding the value of their data, and we're kind of moving towards, new models of, how we potentially monetize that, how we control access to that information. At the end of the day, for me, it comes back to what's the value exchange look like, right? So people are completely willing to put pictures and all kinds of personal information up there for public consumption, but there's there has to be a very clear kind of value exchange associated with that. I think where people start to get a little bit edgier is where this idea that somebody is holding on to their data and then it's being used in ways that maybe they haven't consented to, or they're not, they don't really quite understand. So, for me, I think it's incumbent on us as builders of digital products, to the extent that we're asking data subjects for information, to make it really clear what that value exchange is, and why they're being asked for that information, how it's going to be used, and what they're going to get in return for it.
I think both you and Phil have this sort of situation where others are bringing data to your platforms, or creating data through your platforms, and that might create some really challenging oversight issues for you as businesses.
So for us, it's a really simple one. We don't capture anything that defines the individual. We capture everything that will allow us to define the microsegment, because microsegments are what you need for analysis and recommendation. I guess the only part where we capture, and we don't really capture because we can't identify the developer, is we have a face hash for a developer, and we have their lifeline of what they've done with us. We can't reverse and define who the developer is. We can just tell if it's you.
Yeah, well, I was going to give you an example from a world that will be very familiar to regular CogX attendees. You'll recall the last 2 years, if you walk around the expo, there were chatbot frameworks all over the shop. You build your own chatbot, get it up in days, not weeks. The problem that industry is now facing is stuff like GDPR and security concerns and deploying it within your IT infrastructure. Chatbot industry has now grown up to a point that they're struggling with those real issues. Just to give you an example, we built the chatbot for HSBC in the US, actually. And one of the big challenges we helped them with there was, how do you anonymize personal information that their customers are sharing with the chatbot before it gets sent to one of the cloud providers that does the natural language understanding on it? So, I mean, that's quite a technical point, but you can see that this is very much a problem that needs to be solved. And back to my earlier point, it's now, the technology is 20% the machine learning and the NLP and that. It is 80% the engineering that you put around it to get the value out of this clever technology. That's where the industry is at the moment, including in health and beauty.
Yeah, I would go one further, is that if you do AI badly, you're really opening up yourself to risk. So do it properly.
I have a question, gang, because it's been on my mind all morning with education. It strikes me that the reason work isn't easy for a number of people is because it simply isn't enjoyable and it doesn't have meaning for the individual, for the wider world. So my big question to us CogXers is, how can AI and technology enable more people to find work which they enjoy and which has meaning? So just a tiny little question for our final 5 or so minutes.
I think training the company's AI is quite a cool job, and those that get into it, you know, annotation and downloading your knowledge into the company's artificial intelligence models. That's exactly what you know, the research guys did on the due deal data and on other data sources and on company websites to be able to, you know, bottle their expertise. So I think it's quite a cool job, actually. That's just in enterprise. And then in entrepreneurship world and growth businesses, it just presents so much opportunity, either if you're owning the algorithm or helping others to build it.
Yeah, so I would kind of go back to the example I cited at the beginning and you know, this thing about taking the toil and drudgery out of work, because you know, we could quantify the direct cost savings as a result of that relationship manager not spending a day and a half a week doing manual data entry. But of course, there's also you know, some you know, kind of time created effectively in their week now, where they can actually have conversations with customers, or they can go out and look for new customers, or they can you know, have a more informed conversation with that customer about what their financing needs are. So, you know, I think really that's where the opportunity is to sort of arm people to have better and more meaningful connections and do the kind of work that gives them joy. I don't think anybody's going to be particularly upset that they can't, you know, spend time doing the manual data entry anymore. So, you know, that's kind of where I see it going. But I think that's an important point to raise, because, you know, I'm going to be a bit of a knob and quote Voltaire here, but, you know, he says that there are kind of 3 points to work. There, you know, it creates, it sort of defends against boredom, vice, and provides for needs, right? So this is where we have the opportunity through technology to provide for the needs, but then you've got to think about the other two as well, like the boredom and keeping people away from vice, and that's where the human relationships come into it.
I think when you're starting to use the word knob, your assimilation is complete. Sachin.
I would just say that, you know, I think over the last 200 years of philosophers, you know, starting from Socrates onwards, all defined work as a means to an end, not the end. I think the very fact that we're having a conversation where will people find meaning and happiness in work means that that's defined as the end. I think where we're moving to a world where, you know, a 4-day week is now actually possible, which was never possible 10 years ago. Because ultimately the end is spending time with your 2-year-old or your family, or being able to explore nature and the environment around you, because only then are you really living. Otherwise you are forever working. And I think this is the first time sort of at a point in history after the Industrial Revolution, we're at a place where people can start being human again, because machines are augmenting the things that they don't have to do anymore. And that's really the true meaning of being happy.
So I've got a slight counterpoint on this, which is that, you know, the introduction of automation in the 1950s into the home actually presaged the highest rates of depression in women who didn't have work, because they basically they were left wondering what on earth they were supposed to do with their days, and it was gin and Valium in far too many cases. And I think the creation of taking away the drudgery will not create purpose, and it is the purpose that is what gives you your self-definition. And I think there's a very real chance that actually by taking away drudgery, we climb the wrong mountain. So you end up with lots of people who are like, oh, okay, I've got an easier work day, but I'm still doing something that I don't find morally engaging. So I still work for a casino or whatever, not to, you know, and so I think one of the biggest challenges we have is to try and create meaning in work, and as businesses, you know, whether it's someone like us who strongly believe in open data so that we can use the data for anti-corruption, that allows my team to get up and work and they feel like they're contributing. But if businesses are going to be exploitative, you're going to discover that it doesn't matter how much drudgery you take away from your employees, they're going to be unhappy, especially the ones leaving university at the moment. So, how are we doing for time? Now, that is it. I'm being signalled. That's it. Thank you so much to my panelists, Sachin, Phil, Justin. It was a real pleasure to spend some time with you. I hope that was informative for you. I think we're going down the back in order to meet the speakers. So follow the yellow paddle, the orange paddle.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. Well, gosh. From Conrad at the start, a bit of Voltaire at the end. Well, do we live in the best of all possible worlds? That's what we're going to discuss face to face. If you'd like to carry on this conversation, follow the sign of the lollipop. Megan is holding it aloft face to face. Otherwise, we've got a half an hour break on this stage. Eric Brynjolfsson said on Monday, technology is not destiny. What an interesting thought. Where is the future of work? And what is the future of work and education? We'll be back on this stage at 12:30 discussing those very subjects. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this stage at CogX 2019. My name's Ollie, by the way. I've been emceeing the stage this morning. It's lovely to see you. I think half the reason people come to CogX is to hear the sorts of contributions we're about to hear. But the other half is to meet each other, isn't it? So just do me a quick favor. Would everyone be upstanding? If you're able to stand up. And I'd love you to say a CogX good afternoon to someone you know you have not met before. Even our speakers. Why not? Why not? Let's say some new hellos. Just to make another 50 connections. Why not? Even, someone you're fairly sure. Stroll across the aisle. Why not? Because this is where magic begins. Everyone can do this. Welcome in. Come one, come all. This is good. Okay, thank you. Let's everyone sit down, please. And thank you for sharing your CogX experiences. I've been reading quite a few of you. Hashtag CogX19. Big question came through this morning. Ollie, are these your real eyebrows? Yes, they are. But I do appreciate whoever sent that. Thank you. Hashtag 20. You are ahead of your time, sir. This is great. Well, we've got news about hashtag 20, actually. The date is in the diary. And I'll be saying more about that in a minute. Yes, so if you want to get a year ahead, or why not hashtag 30? Oh, I thought you meant 3020, sir. Okay, that would be interplanetarily brilliant. So we're going to have 3 great presentations, part 1. We're going to have a panel discussion led by Paul, and then we'll have some Meet the Speakers. If you want to get face-to-face with our contributors, we can do that afterwards. So let me get on with the show. I'll hand over the reins to Paul Mansell. You will know Paul or his work already in many, many cases. He is an award-winning social entrepreneur in his own right. So many of things happening at CogX are going to involve tough conversations, standing up for things, standing against things. Paul fought against apartheid for many years in South Africa, and he was the first General Secretary of the Post-Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission out of South Africa. So huge kudos. He could have stopped right there. He didn't. He carried on. And by the way, recently has founded one of the most incredible connectors of people fighting to solve problems worth solving, The Conduit. I commend it to you. Right here in the heart of London, it has already sparked some life-changing connections. Enough from me. You're in Paul's capable hands. He will introduce our guests. Ladies and gentlemen, the brilliant Paul Mansell.
Thank you very, very much. That's a very peppy and inspirational and very nice introduction. I'm bound to disappoint thereafter. So what I'm going to do is just introduce our panel. Each of them is going to do about a 12 to 15 minute presentation. There's a tremendous amount of expertise in the room. Then they're each going to come up and then they're going to watch each other's presentations from down below. And thereafter, we will then have a 15 or 20 minute moderated conversation by myself trying to tackle what I think is one of the most important subjects. So I think without much further ado, I'm going to ask Raphael to come up. And Raphael is the professor at the Dyson School of Design Engineering at Imperial and professor and director of the Wellbeing Technology Lab at the University of Sydney. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There I am. Well, everybody in this room already knows that the world is changing and changing very fast. The schools and workplaces of a few years from now will probably not look that much like the ones that we have today. And in these 3 days at CogX, people have been telling you about what the future of AI looks like, and it's obviously very difficult to predict. And one of the reasons it's so difficult is that technologies change us as much as we change them. Now, as a design engineer, someone who builds systems that will be used years from now, I need to think about the implications of my intentions. Intentionality matters. We generally reap what we sow. So what I will do today is tell you a bit about the seeds of 4 projects that we have been working on and describe what are the fruits that we got, the learning fruits that we got from each of them. First, and this is the ethos of my research lab, we think that all technologies should be designed to support psychological well-being. Every chair we sit on, maybe not this one so much, but every chair we sit on when we are in the office has been ergonomically designed to respect your physical health. Think about it. Every technology we use in the workplace, every tool we use in schools, if every app we use, every mobile phone had been designed to respect our psychological health, what will be the impact of that? So we think that to improve worldwide well-being, we need to design for well-being directly. And this is what we call positive computing, the design and development of technologies that support well-being. And this comes from a long tradition of science around well-being, and there are many different models. The most commonly used one is the clinical model. So if an employee is suffering from burnout, or a child in school is suffering from depression or anxiety, he will be treated by the GP, the psychiatrist, using a clinical model. In the clinical model, if they ask you some questions, if you score about some threshold, you are ill. If you are below that threshold, it means that you are doing well. Now, in the 1990s, a number of critics came up critiquing, saying that's not enough. We need to do better than that. They studied the people that are generally flourishing, that are doing really well, and what are the factors that make them different. And then looking at those factors and trying to design interventions that will help everyone else. Some of those factors are socio-emotional intelligence. This has picked up a lot in the business domain, and it has to do with managing emotions, empathy, and so on. Another one is self-determination theory, where the idea is that there are basic psychological needs that we need to be able to fulfill in order to flourish. There are measures, like subjective measures of well-being, like the ones that the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman developed in the 1990s, or neuroscience and psychophysiology techniques that we can use to measure the impact on well-being. Now, in my research group, we have been focusing on 3 factors: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. We chose these 3 factors that Richard Ryan and Ed Desi call basic psychological needs because there is thousands, literally thousands of papers showing that they support motivation and engagement in the workplace. They improve health outcomes in doctors and different type of therapies and in students. And these studies across thousands of papers show that there is cross-cultural, these apply in different cultures and different age groups, and more importantly, they give engineers and designers concrete constructs that we can take into account when we are building new products. So how can design engineers bring these considerations, these factors into the development of actual systems? What are the seeds that we engineers can plant so we can produce systems that support well-being? I will be telling you about 4 projects, and each of them has kind of what I consider a learning outcome for myself. The first one has to do with automation in the workplaces. As we have learned here in CogX, workplaces are changing very fast. We're increasingly automating all sorts of tasks in the workplaces. And generally the discourse there is about improving efficiency. What we have been looking, particularly in this project, we look at what is the impact of automation on employees. What is the impact on their well-being? In this project, we work with Reach Out. It's a charity, wonderful charity with 1.6 million users, Australian youth, who go to there seeking help to deal better with difficult times. So one of the functionalities they have is peer support groups. The peer support groups have human moderators that are generally volunteers, and they asked us to develop natural language processing techniques that can improve the efficacy and efficiency of these moderators. So we went and we started building the system that automated as much as we could from the process that the moderators had to do. What we found out roughly a year into the project is that that didn't work. People were not engaged, the moderators didn't like the system, and so we had to go back to the drawing board, and we understood that we were not putting enough focus on satisfying psychological needs. So we redesigned the system to support these needs, and now it's been over 2 years that they have used to process thousands of posts every week. And the posts are basically triage, that's why the name of the product, into red, that means that someone has to respond as quickly as possible, yellow, that means that there's no urgency, and green saying to the moderators they don't need to manage that. And then there's an ultra red for cases of suicide and ideation and self-harm. So when there is extreme cases, that triggers a safety protocol. So protecting moderators' well-being was critical in this project. Their job is already very, very hard. It's a very highly emotional type of job. And one way to do this is to satisfy these psychological needs, bringing features, functionalities that increase the sense of autonomy they have about their jobs, their job descriptions. Functionalities that increase the sense of competence about what they're doing. Remember, these are volunteers, they're not psychologists, they are people with lived experiences about these problems that the young people have. And then connecting them to other people in the community, improving relatedness. We also, in many projects, bring other factors. In this one, we look at compassion. There's a lot of compassion therapy research that tells you that people that are going through this sort of work are at the risk of empathic distress. And one way to deal with that is to show them the positive impact that the efforts they do have. So what we learned from this project is that we need to design autonomous systems for autonomous humans. I want, when I build these systems, to have measures that tell me when a design feature has an impact on the sense of autonomy that people have. So in this case, if I'm building a feature that allows a moderator to assign the task to someone else, possibly because they have more experience about the topic, I want to see how that improves their sense of autonomy about the way they go in their job. And I can ask them questions that have been validated in many psychological studies. So that was the first project. The second project deals with mental health more specifically. In the sense, this was a project funded by the Movember Foundation trying to address the problem of mental health in male-dominated industries. Men have different challenges to women because when they're having psychological problems, they're less likely to seek help. So in this project, we incorporated behavioral activation therapy and mindfulness training into a process that produced a tool, and eventually we released it, ran a randomized control trial, like the largest randomized control trial ever for a workplace mental health technology. And we were able to show that the efficacy had a 2-week increased productivity on the workforce. So a very significant economic impact for the industry partners that contribute to the project. Now, in this project, there were 2 learning outcomes that I think were important to me. The first one is showing that health AI, health technologies can improve health in the workplace. And the second one is also connected because also we did a lot of co-design activities, like in the first one, that technologies, for them to be successful, need to involve users from early on. That's an essential aspect in all our projects. The third project has to do with affective computing, using technologies, machine learning to detect emotions. So in this case, you can see a writer, and the system will automatically detect the mental state of this person. We have published some books and papers on this topic looking at the different emotions that come into play in learning and in different business contexts. And then we have brought this into a platform called EQ Clinic that is about improving nonverbal behaviors, communication skills in medical students. For about 3 years, we have run this with about 500 students per semester. And what the platform does is similar to a telehealth platform, creates automatic feedback about their communication, adds also the feedback from the tutors and from the patients, or we call them simulated patients, and this provides feedback about their communication skills. And again, using randomized controlled trials, we were able to show that the system can help improve communication skills. So the learning outcome for me from this project was that learning technologies can help us develop human skills, things like empathy and communication, that we normally don't think about. We tend to think more about efficacy, but the other aspects that we can bring with AI. So the fourth and last project was a study we did with colleagues at the University of Sydney for the Department of Education. And what the secretary asked is for us to think about the curriculum that will be used in schools for children that were born today, that will wear, or when we wrote the report, that will grow up in a world of AI. And so we interviewed and had workshops with academics in different disciplines, from engineering to health to education, etc. And there were two main conclusions from the report. The first one is that we need to support what they call generic skills. But rather than doing it as it's often done, that it's in very general way, we have to do it in a specific, concrete business problem, a specific discipline. People have to become good at something, and that's where you learn to have those generic skills. And the second one is that students need to learn about the impact of AI, how AI can be used, for example, to manipulate them, to change their behavior, and so on. So I want to focus, to close, on this second conclusion that came out of the report, one that as a parent has been a lot in my mind lately, and this has to do, for example, with YouTube, that it's the most commonly e-learning platform. We all go, schools, teachers, go to YouTube to learn. And the interaction with YouTube is already driven by AI. And as mentioned at the beginning, all digital environments change us as much as we change them. But AI has a potential to supercharge these changes. It can help educate, it can help us learn about new perspectives, new views of the world, but it can also be used to influence and dominate us. And schools and universities have a role to play to teach about bias and influence. But also do those who design the systems underpinning this change. As Superman's mom said, with power comes great responsibility. And we have the responsibility to sow the right seed. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Our next speaker is Ian Golden, who is the director of the Oxford Martin Programme on Technological and Economic Change. Ian.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to think about some of the mega changes that are going to affect the world of work and education going forward. This is the vital topic, and it's one which, of course, we know very little about. It's one where, sorry about this, it's one where the changes, let me just find my slideshow and then I will be with you. Can we get on the screen? Where the changes happening are so rapid that predicting the future is simply impossible. The one thing we know is that this is going to be the slowest midday session you attend for the rest of your lives. And that's because the pace of innovation, the number of brilliant brains around the world is growing in extraordinary ways. When I first went to China in the 80s, there were 70 people doing doctoral degrees. This year, there are 280,000. And it's not just the brilliant people around the world that are thinking in new ways, the new Mozart, Shakespeare's, and Einsteins, that randomly distributed will come up with ideas which will transform the world. It's that people are connecting, that people working in teams, sparking off each other, like is happening at CogX sessions, at a different speed to anything before. So the lab I created in Oxford, working on new cures for cancer, works on a 24-hour research cycle with data in the cloud, with labs in Shanghai, Mumbai, Paris, New York, and San Francisco. This is very different to anything that ever happened before. And that's why the pace of innovation is accelerating, formal and informal. We move from a world where only 2 billion people were literate before the Berlin Wall came down 30 years ago in 1989, to a world today where there are 6.5 billion literate people. That's 4.5 billion more literate people. If you believe in brain power as the transformation force in the world, expect an exciting time. Kids today, to live to 100, we have no idea what technologies will be around, but we do know that what's happening is leading to a much healthier, better world. It's leading to a world which is unprecedented in progress, where average life expectancy has increased by 20 years over the last 35 years, where illiteracy has gone down by 70% and the number of desperately poor people has gone down by 300 million. There's lots to celebrate and there's lots to understand that comes from education and learning. Simple ideas like smoking kills you, wearing a safety belt saves your life, spreading around the world, and very complicated ones like those embedded in vaccines, in cures for cancer. So if things are so great, why are people so angry and what's happening? What can we think about the future of work and education? Well, firstly, while the walls are coming down between countries, they're going up within them. Inequality growing everywhere. And the financial crisis is a very salutary reminder that brilliant people make brilliant mistakes. 20,000 PhDs from very great places, including my own, Oxford University, with the best institutions like the treasuries and central banks, the IMF, which is the elite of global governance, failed to manage this complex dynamic system. So we need to be very humble. We need to understand why people distrust education, professionals, experts in these elite cities, in these elite conferences. We don't know what's going on. We're out of control. And this pullback, this pushback,
many traders
is dramatic.
were expecting a new record to be
We
set
also need
this
to
year's-
recognize that the market is not going to give us a response to what we need. This tuna that just went up sold for $3.1 million. The rhinoceros horn worth more than gold. More and more high-tech poachers and fishermen chasing the remaining resources, we get extinction. So the market doesn't provide the answer. But of course, states are short-term as well, acting in their national interests. So we need to think in new ways, and we need education systems that go beyond our current incentive structures, that are different. A continuation of business as usual in education will simply lead to catastrophic failure of the world. New education systems like the one that I'm the chair of, this is a new economics curriculum, a mass online economics curriculum, free, open source, I believe are going to provide much of the answer. But we need to think and learn in new ways if we're to stop this pushback, this new rejection of connectiveness, this rejection of elites, of expertise, just as happened after the Renaissance, when the Inquisitions killed all innovation in Europe and led to religious wars. We're going through a similar period. We need to understand that education in itself is not an objective. The majority of suicide bombers have tertiary degrees. ISIS is not a stupid institution. It's a battle of ideas that's engaging. And in this battle of ideas, we all need to engage. Being a bystander gives the space to extremists on all sides. We also need to understand that technology is a dual-edged sword, leading to enormous possibilities, but also to very, very deep questions and potentially disastrous outcomes, as we've seen, of course, with the corruption of elections, with Facebook, and with many other things. The back mouse, a wild mouse, the front one, a genetically modified one. This is the sort of thing we're doing in Oxford with very well looked after mice. The back one drops out after 20 minutes, 200 meters, the front one goes for 2 kilometers, 2 hours. The enhancement capabilities which are happening now in genomics raise very fundamental questions about the creation of superhumans. Are we going to reconfigure our children? Are we going to enhance them to be smarter? Are we going to give them chemicals, as some of the kids from posh schools take before they do our entrance exams in Oxford, before they write them? Are we going to send these in sachets to poor kids around the world so that they can compete? These are the problems that come out of this technological leapfrogging that's advancing not at exponential speed, but at super exponential speed. Deep ethical questions and questions about how we engage in this battle of ideas, how we ensure that the internet really does lead to what the dreamers that invented it in the early 90s wanted, which is the death of distance, the world is flat, the end of history. These tropes, these fantasies, we know now to be absolutely wrong. Place more important than ever, elite education more insignificant than ever, the gaps wider than ever. And how do we ensure in this system not only that it has trust and integrity, but that as it moves into the Internet of Things and into our bodies, as it is surely doing at rapid speed, it gives humans augmentation to be good, not to be bad? How do we ensure that AI doesn't take our jobs? Work we're doing in Oxford suggests that about 40% of UK jobs are vulnerable to this over the next 20 years, about half of US jobs, about 60% of Chinese jobs, about 70% of Ethiopian jobs. So what is the future of work in this world where machines do anything that's repetitive and rules-based? Service centers are already getting higher customer satisfaction ratings from AI than from human service representatives. And this is the beginning of the story. So how we feel about technology matters. It's not because they exist, it's because we want them. Germany has banned GMOs and nuclear power. Societies can reject technologies. We will break up these monopolies that are running the internet and other things. And what we've seen in the US, of course, is the turbocharging of this into a new Cold War. The banning of firms with 5G technology, and a war which is certainly developing around data. How we in the UK respond to this, whether we stay joined up or withdraw, whether we engage in protectionism, will shape the future, not only of technology in the UK, but of the way that we fit in. When you look at our beautiful world from space, you see no borders. You see this extraordinary web of connectivity. This is the opportunity that comes. I'm optimistic because I think we're learning in new ways. The Renaissance, which I've worked a lot on, was essentially a white male affair. Now we have the full talent pool of the world. This gives me a cause for optimism. I'm optimistic because one person created a global movement through Me Too that made sexual harassment less acceptable. I'm optimistic because I never thought in my lifetime a tide would swing so rapidly in Ireland that it could have a gay prime minister in a Catholic country. I'm optimistic because, although I don't agree with all his policies, someone with no political party was able to become president of France on a pro-globalization open ticket. I'm optimistic because a 16-year-old schoolgirl could create a mass movement that changed the way that kids are thinking around the world. New ways of thinking enable us to empathize, enable us to transform the world in dramatic ways. They're an opportunity to do what humans uniquely can do, that machines, I don't believe, will do even in the youngest people in this room's lifetimes, which is experience empathy, to make judgment, to have ethical foundations, to be wise. Parents ask me when they come to Oxford, should their children do maths or should their children study languages or classics or whatever else? And the answer is, of course, it doesn't matter. Be curious, explore. Machines will get very good at maths and make that redundant for humans pretty soon. But understanding what's going on, understanding the connectedness and being fact-based. We can celebrate the fact for the first time in history that the world leaders have listened to scientists. Too little, too late, but things are happening. We can see the evidence. This is work I've done which shows what will happen to Florida with climate change. We're beginning to understand our Earth and our connectiveness in new ways. Even mainstream publications are getting it. And of course, that science is allowing us to have new technologies. So I'm optimistic that we can use technologies and we can use new learning methods to come together, to create a world where it's not man against machine, but man and woman with machine. If we can do that, we can all rock on to very happy old age. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Our next and last speaker is Amel Kabul, the CEO of the Education Outcomes Fund for Africa and the Middle East. Welcome.
Thank you. I need your help. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. So I'd like to start by saying that today we are facing a global learning crisis, despite all the progress within literacy, and despite the progress in access that we've made, we still are facing a learning crisis. And why do I call it learning crisis, not education crisis? Is because around 150 million kids are out of school today, but even more, around 330 million are in school and basically not learning. And this is a global phenomenon, and I think even in such rich countries as the UK, you see that. The place where I come from, the Middle East, has the highest youth unemployment in the world. Around, in the next decade or so, we'll have 100 million youth entering the job market. Today, 40% of those are unemployed. Yeah? So the question, and many of those have even tertiary education, so we are kind of facing universities that are churning out unemployed people. So I was very lucky to be part of an initiative led by Gordon Brown in his function as UN Envoy for Global Education, which was called the Education Commission, and we came up with the Learning Generation Report. And there is a triangle. One is the learning crisis, so the kids that are in school and not learning. The other piece that we've heard here before is the numbers of job disappearing. Between 40% to 80% of the job are going to disappear due to automation and technology, depending on the country and the continent. And the third, let's say, triangle corner is that if you take a continent like Africa, some countries, let's say, Eritrea or Somalia, even if every student became teacher, like every student, no engineers, no doctors, no lawyers, no one, you wouldn't have enough teachers. So those demographic changes are happening basically in those places where we estimate that by 2030, around, less than 6,000 days from now, 1 billion young Africans are going to enter the job market. So we've never had to educate as many people as fast with so few resources as we do today. And that's kind of a big challenge. And these 1 billion youth, are they going to be, roaming cities unemployed and becoming a security and migration and whatever challenge, or are these going to be the innovators and leaders of tomorrow? And can technology play a role? So if we can't transform education, or we can't achieve the goals by building more schools and hiring more teachers only, or building more universities, how are we going to overcome those challenges? So this is where technology and AI can play a role. So you can look at that triangle, I call it the disaster triangle, and just weep and think it's all doom and gloom for the continent, or you can think, okay, what can we do? So in the work we've done around the Learning Generation Report, the good news is we can do something about it. So if countries move as fast as the 25% best improvers within their income level, so low income, middle income, high income, then we can have within a generation every child in school and learning. And what do we need to do about this? And how technology can play a role? Performance. I always say education is the least reformed institution of the world. If you take a teacher from 100 years ago, or university professor maybe, and put them today in a school, they probably can perform up to 80%, I would guess, of what they've been doing. If you take a doctor from 100 years ago and put them in a hospital today, they probably will be able to do close to nothing. Yeah? And so the question is, how can we increase the performance of our education systems? Technology can play a role, for example, because I have two examples. Lango here helps government and schools to monitor student attendance. Nova Pioneers, these are two in using deep analytics in Africa to look at, our children are learning. Because the interesting thing is only half of the countries have standardized assessments, and actually in primary and even less than half in secondary school. So how are you supposed to actually, govern, be it in policy or actually for a teacher, if you don't know if the children are learning? And or the measurement around learning and performance management technology can play a huge role, make it much cheaper and more accessible and almost real time, basically, so that you can follow that. It can give access. Mshula in Kenya is one. There is an SMS story project in Papua New Guinea. There is a bigger project that I think is amazing in the Amazonas Media Center solution, where you have only few content teachers in the center in Manaus, in the capital, working with over 2,500 coaching development teachers in every village, and they could give access to almost 500,000 children to attend secondary school, which in the past wouldn't be able to attend any education. The sad thing is that a lot of these technological solutions are small, are very local, are underfunded, and really are not kind of collaborating to kind of make a big movement, that we need for this 1 billion youth. So what we've started, the Learning Generation Report had few recommendations around performance, around innovation, around inclusion, but also around finance. And today, since November 2017, I'm leading one of those initiatives, which is the Education Outcomes Fund for Africa and Middle East. And what we're trying to do is, it's a $1 billion fund to pay for success, so to pay for learning results. So we're not paying for salaries or building, we're paying for children who are learning. And so one is, we feel like the way you pay for a thing does matter. So if we want to achieve more results, not just bodies in classrooms, then maybe we should pay for learning. We pay share for those outcomes. But even more importantly is we want to actually move the money, especially because we are kind of a blend between philanthropy and impact investing, from looking at at investment opportunities to investment necessities. So we're talking here about SDGs and how to achieve those. Today, the investment and the asset classes and the investment tools don't work for our continent in Africa. They're not long-term enough, they're just too expensive, they don't fit. We have to create new investment tools. And today also the money goes to opportunities. So you go around and find this amazing startup or this amazing person and you invest there and expect certain returns, but we want to move the money to investment necessities, to say this is what we care about. One of our projects, we care about that these 150,000 children who are out of school in northern Ghana today go into remedial training for 9 months and then integrate public school. And we're going to pay for that. And we're going to pay for this long term. We're going to give them money in an unrestricted, not like a government or grant or aid money that is super bureaucratic. We're going to give it like an investor gave maybe Twitter or Facebook at the beginning, the money. And so we can unleash innovation entrepreneurship for people to find solutions. We are not going to tell them how to do it, but what we care about. And so we can create a vibrant ecosystem of entrepreneurs, nonprofit, civil society who can help harness the public school system. So we're putting kind of aid and philanthropy on its head. We're bringing impact investors in. We're transforming the way non-state actors, if you want to call them, this is the jargon of education, which are basically social entrepreneurs and NGO are funded. Pushing the boundary a lot. It felt like the last 1.5 years like building a plane while flying with an amazing team, but really seeing a lot of resistance, which is really interesting, means like we are changing something. Governments and agents which supposedly should actually love us. Imagine, I'm going to tell you, taxpayer money, philanthropic money is only paying for results, nothing else. Extremely also resisting this and from other, stakeholders. But we hope that by, there is maybe it sounds a bit maybe too big or arrogant, but we really believe in it that these outcome funds which we're creating are going to be for the social sector and development sector what venture capital funds were for the tech industry. The beginning, as long as one person invested in a small tech idea, it didn't really fly. It only flew with venture capital funds, and it became an asset class. No one really believed in it. We're building the first at-scale outcome payment fund for a social challenge, and we hope that in some years, thousands of these funds will exist. So we're kind of transforming development challenge, which is an education in our case, into an investable opportunity.
Okay, we're going to do some, take a seat anywhere, some baseline setting. So the first thing I'm going to ask the panel, some of you in your talk cited it, but just a quick lightning round. What percentage of jobs are at risk?
Well, I have heard ranges of 40 to 60%, but I'm not an expert on that topic. So.
You said it, I think, yeah.
You know, that's a question that could take hours. We have in Oxford the group that's done most of the work on this, the group I created. We have high numbers. 47% of US workers, as Carl Frey, Michael Osborne and others work, and my work. But the range is huge. I mean, McKinsey says 8%, OECD says 13%. We think we're right. They all use our data. There's a lot of assumptions behind what one's thinking. What we're not talking about is what's actually going to happen. Okay, and we're also not talking about the new jobs. Those are the two big uncertainties. But I've also done a BBC program called Will AI Kill Development? And I interviewed a lot of people. One Sobot, for example, an automated sewing machine now can produce 300,000 T-shirts a year. Okay, 100 of these would produce all the T-shirts in the world. And the people in Bangladesh are saying, what is our future? In Nairobi, the call centers, they're going to disappear within the next 5 years. So I think it's dramatic, and I think it's particularly developing countries that are going to feel it first.
So let me drill. Okay, Amel, and then I'll come back to you.
No, I mean, as you said, it raises from 10% to 80%, and depends on what countries. I'm definitely sure that I think this is working. Sorry, thanks. In our continent and elsewhere, I think the worrying piece is that there will be kind of high-skilled jobs for extremely high-skilled people, and then maybe some jobs that you can't basically kill, but what's happening with that kind of middle, you know? And are we maybe redefining jobs? You know, like if you look at a few hundred years ago, the word job didn't exist. You know, like you were born a slave or serf or monarch, or maybe art, handicraft, and when your dad was a blacksmith, you didn't think about what job you're going to do, you know, so in a way, jobs is industrialization and these last centuries. So the question is, are we, I love looking at big picture and historic thing, and I think like the printing press was a technology that really changed the world and made the world we live in here. Internet, AI is another technology. We don't know how the world would look like, but it's definitely very different, yeah.
Just briefly, the Gutenberg press, of course, led to religious war. But, I mean, also led to Michelangelo and Copernicus and everyone else. The important thing about jobs is that what everyone's forgetting when they say net, like the McKinseys or OECD, place really matters more than ever. So it might well be the case that we have record low unemployment in London, record high salaries, or in New York or San Francisco. Tell people in the Midwest or the north of England this, and they'll point to the record high housing prices, the record high transport costs and congestion, and say, we can't go there. So that's the issue. It's not so much whether there'll be jobs, but where the jobs are and whether people can get them.
So let's just get some precision. Is your view net? Everybody agrees that the nature of work is going to radically transform. The bigger debate is, do we net get to the same place but with very different jobs, unevenly distributed, or do you think that we net lose jobs as well?
I'm convinced that for the next 30, 40 years, we net lose lots and lots of jobs. The long term, there might be a very different sort of world. Right. Why would you employ someone in a repetitive, rules-based task when a machine can do it 24 hours a day at a much, much lower cost?
Okay. so just to, do you want to come in on that?
Yes. Well, I guess another consequence I see possible is, especially now that we have all these movements against democracy, what happens is that when there is a very, very serious economic crisis, you have a dictator that to gain power will start a war. Right. I come from Argentina, and that's what happened in Falklands and in both sides of the battle. You know, it was a government who was looking to use nationalism as a way of taking power again. And regrettably, this is going to bring economic crises, and one has to be careful about those unintended consequences other consequences.
So it's worth for the kind of those of us who are the non-experts in the audience just to kind of pause for a moment and reflect on the magnitude of what's being said. The two poles of the debate on the future of work are between one group of people who say net there's going to be a significant loss of jobs, and another group who says at best we're probably going to be net neutral, but the changing nature of work is going to be spectacular. In both scenarios, you either have very significant large numbers of people out of work or a generational gap where you're needing to reskill people into a new form of work. And the reskilling of people, you know, the kind of old easy adage that you're going to take coal miners and going to put them into green retrofitters of buildings. The coal miners are in West Virginia and the green retrofitters and solar panel installers are in California. You ain't reskilling those people. And some of those people are at stages of their lives where the reskilling is a much bigger economic, social, and political challenge. So I guess the question is, if the best case scenario is net the same amount of jobs with a radical reskilling and therefore a generational disruption, in all plausible scenarios, we are going to have, unlike any other comparable moment in the last 200 years, significant percentages of our populations concentrated in some inconvenient places being angry and disaffected. Is that likely?
It's already
happening.
Okay.
That's what we got.
Fine.
That's Brexit, that's Trump,
Great.
that's Le Pen, that's
right.
AFD, that's what it is.
And if you're not enjoying it now, it ain't getting better.
Yeah, and it's a vicious circle because
Right.
you slow the economy down, you get more unemployment, you get more angry people, you get a race to the bottom on taxes, you know, from a new government coming in here and from the US, and therefore there's less money to redistribute, and then people get more angry. So yes, it's a bad cycle to be in. That's why we have to break it.
Okay, and so now I'm going to go in order and say, what are your best ideas for addressing what has to be thought of as a political tsunami about to run over us, right? So if we're not going to sit like deers in the headlights and just go, this is about to happen to us, and the other, you know, pressing analog is climate, and we probably have to answer both of those questions in the same way and with the same degree of urgency. Where does salvation lie? What are your best ideas? And what are the things that are going to be at the order of magnitude capable of meeting the nature of this challenge?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think we're going to start questioning. I mean, there are some similarities between what is happening now and what happened in 1840, when, for example, in the UK, they went from not having any trains to be full of trains. And at the same time, you had John Stuart Mill and Karl Marx writing books with completely different perspectives of how the role of policy, the role of humans. And I think the sort of questions that are being raised now is going to be very similar. What is freedom? What does it mean to be a free individual? And of course, there will be multicultural perspectives that we didn't have back then, at least not those two individuals.
I think what's behind this is when things change more rapidly, people get left behind more quickly. And in that process, when you have a race to the bottom on taxation, you have the opposite of what needs to happen. You need to invest faster. Everything is out of date more quickly. Our transport systems, our education systems, our health systems, our ideas. And moving, this isn't the flexibility of Maggie Thatcher of labour markets. That's already been done. This is a flexibility of, can you move to where the job is? Can you reskill? Can you get the new education system or the new health system? Can you move? And that requires more investment. And so I think the only answer is a rethinking of the role of the state in investment, higher levels of investment, taxation, and the ability of people to move. What does that mean? It means housing markets have to work. People have to be able to come to London. It means transport systems have to be effective. You have to be able to fit people in at cheaper, affordable costs to move further, quicker. Now the inner cities are occupied by yuppies The suburbs are occupied by middle-class people, and poor people that used to live in the inner cities can't be there anymore, and they can't commute anymore because they have to be an hour and a half or 2 hours away to afford to live. And that is not a recipe for a dynamic, successful society. So my feeling is it's about investing in infrastructure, education, health, and change, and that's going to require, the bottom line is it's going to require higher levels of taxation. By the way, that also deals with the climate change question, because we're going to have to radically go to zero carbon. That's going to create lots of jobs too, if we do it quickly enough. And the only thing I think I'll ever agree with Theresa May on is what she's done as an outgoing president for the country, which is to move to zero carbon by 2030. That's a big thing.
Yeah. I mean, if I wouldn't say education, it would be strange, investing more in education. But I do believe that social unrest are going to be more and more. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the Middle East and Africa, and it's a different situation, and also time in Europe and the US, so kind of I see the inequality will increase, and we will have more social unrest, and we won't be able to build as tall walls within the country. So the question is, I'm also totally pro-government playing a bigger and different role. I never thought I would say that. I grew up in a household with a father who was social democrat, and I was much more liberal. But today, I feel the question is how these investments will happen. How can government transform their role to be, I call it commissioner for outcomes. Like their role is to deliver more for their citizen, and they can play a huge role in how they spend their money, not just what they spend it in, which I think we talk about education and health, but how do they spend that, and how do they work in this triangle with private sector and civil society, and can we find new ways of type of cooperation so that the money spent really achieves better results for the right type of people, you know?
So let me ask a final question. Is the sorts of things that you suggested, Ian, which are infrastructure and taxes, most importantly, transport, these are things that are not easily achieved by the private sector. They need an active role of government. And it seems we're caught in a bit of a doom loop or a paradox here, because the kind of governments that get elected on populist tickets are not the kind of governments that are interested in broad 20 years socially beneficial infrastructure investments, different approaches to taxation. They give their citizens quick sugar fixes in response to anger on the streets, and anger on the streets doesn't necessarily equate with the kind of solutions that you need to build a long-term future. Now, I'm just congenitally an optimist, so does that not mean that we have to find alternate sources of power mobilization, financing, to be able to kind of tackle this in the short term, because it's urgent, while we tackle the broader agenda of taking back the state and putting progressive people back in power who are capable of winning this? But we need some short-term bridge solutions right now. I think your fund is at least one of them, but is that not the case?
I will give a pragmatic answer. I was cabinet minister in a government, and honestly, like what I did personally and within ours, I talked about the short term but worked about the long term. You know, like I spent 80% of my time working on the longer strategic. I was responsible for tourism, 8 to 12% of Tunisia's GDP. I knew that the structural problems are huge and we need 7 to 11 years to solve them. That's what I spent 80% of my time with. But I discovered very quickly when I was speaking about that, no one wanted to listen to it. You know, people wanted to talk about today. So in communication, I was speaking 80% about the short term. In real life, I was working on it. I know it sounds like but it was a pragmatic solution that kind of, in that sense, helped. Can you translate this everywhere? Probably not. We were a technocrat government in a very specific situation. But I do feel that, like looking today at my country this year, we're going through elections. Topics like education, where you never actually used to win elections with, are now coming up again. I think this sense of urgency of people seeing, you know, the world of job is changing. They seeing the children maybe, you know, have to struggle more than, you know, they did. A lot of freelance jobs, you know, and so kind of a stronger focus on things like education and health is coming from people who are going to vote. I hope so.
Yeah. The private sector can play a massive role in the sorts of work that you're doing and that you're doing, Amel, on social impact investing. Social outcome funds are terrific things, but I don't believe they're going to happen without, firstly, changes in public policy. I've worked on project finance, the disaster of some of what's gone on with project finance. People are paying much more than they should for hospitals, for example, that have been done by the private sector than if they'd been done by the public sector. So getting that regulatory environment right for public-private partnerships is important. But also, I believe we're underestimating the electorate. The populists have won because they're actually telling the truth. Governments have left them down. The financial crisis was a total failure of expertise. The London elite don't know what's going on in big parts of the country, just like the New York or San Francisco elite don't know. And that anger is a real anger based on people's experience. And unless you address that experience and have a narrative, which is how you can help people across the country have a better life, I don't think you deserve to be in power. So I think that the challenge is not short-term, long-term. I think it's about telling a compelling story about why people should vote for you and trust you. And that is really something which one has to win the argument on. One has to demonstrate that one isn't part of the old group. It beggars belief to me that people are voting for the current group of politicians. But it's 100,000, Conservative Party members in their old constituencies, average age of 55, who are going to nominate the next Prime Minister of the UK. This is not a democratic decision about who the Prime Minister is going to be. Someone else must be able to do better than that.
So I think it's not necessarily a short thing. I kind of agree with the previous speakers, in particular with what Ian was saying. I think it's rebalancing of public private powers. Personally, I think in this new discussion that we are having and we have to have, the third sector, the non-for-profits, will start becoming more important, and a lot of those services will eventually, I'm hoping, will start being provided by, structured by the government, but then provided by a non-for-profit type of structure. That's my naive understanding.
We're going to have time for a question. Please.
I'd just like to hear your views on universal basic income.
All right, there are 5 reasons why UBI is a very bad idea. Firstly, if you do the arithmetic, it simply doesn't add up. I've done it, for example, putting the UK onto the minimum wage, about £10.70 an hour, not very much. That would be the entire budget. The entire budget. There would be nothing left for health, education, anything. It's simply an arithmetic fallacy. The second reason it's a bad idea is that it would increase poverty. Why? Because the targeted benefits that now go for disability benefit, for child benefit, for housing benefit, for unemployment benefit, for sickness benefit would no longer exist. Everyone would be getting the same amount, and it would be less than the people that are currently getting targeted benefits get. The third reason I objected is because I think it's ethically unsound. I don't believe we should be giving billionaires money. I think we should be targeting our money. Universal means universal. Everyone gets it. We should be targeting our money at people that deserve to get it. The fourth reason I don't believe in it is because all the evidence from paying people to... It comes from a belief that we're going to have mass unemployment and we should pay people to stay at home and work. All the evidence on that shows that that leads to massive social dislocation. These are the diseases of despair of the Midwest of the US. Crack addicts, other opiate addicts, suicide, divorce, crime, depression. You look at it, when people are paid to stay at home, they get very, very angry. And the reason is clear, because we get much more from our lives by being with colleagues, by meaning from work, by contributing, by social networks, by learning at work, etc., etc. None of us would want to be paid to stay at home. Why should we condemn other people to do it? And the fifth reason, which I think is the most important reason, I think it's a terrible idea, it's postponing a fundamental conversation we all need to have, which is what is the future of work? This is a red herring. This is a political sop, which a bizarre coalition of Silicon Valley libertarians and left-wing trade unionists put out as what the future holds, rather than us discussing part-time work, paid work for being at home, childcare and other work. creative industry work, what humans should do that machines cannot do. That's what we should be thinking about the future of work, and we should be thinking about much more leisure in a distributed way and a much better way of embracing the future than UBI. But I think the UBI debate is dangerous because it's pushing that debate away and putting center stage a different debate, which I think is a very dangerous one. So that otherwise I like it.
Now give us at least an argument for it.
I honestly, I wouldn't. I mean, I fought for, including in our country, for example, we have subvention, subvention, how do you call them in English?
Social Security.
Yeah, like no support, like that goes across the line for, let's say, for products or for things. Subsidy, subsidy, sorry. So, like I fought for rather using technology and to define, in our case, which are the 800,000 poorest family, and to just kind of support these families rather than spreading around, because I feel, and this is some work that we're, for example, the fund we're doing, we're trying a new innovation which we call cohort pricing. So in a way, we pay more for children with disability, we pay more for rural girls, etc. I'd rather actually accept and admit that, your postcode still defines who you become. I don't believe in this rubbish that if you work hard, you can do everything. It's basically not true, If you start from here and you start from here and we have to get to E, and then, I don't see where that kind of, you can work as hard as you can, but the person is there. So it's more, how can we use government resources through taxations and others to kind of support, to kind of, that people start from more closer areas, and that goes through investing more in families and children that need it.
You're going to get the last word, and we try to get off the stage, so please.
Adding something to this, I think maybe the economists are already working on this, but looking at what has happened in countries like Argentina, Venezuela, where inequity produce very serious social disruption, and this has happened since I was a child. And you can see with that you get into power autocrats, people that, and they've tried, in Argentina, for example, they have tried systems where the government tries to subsidize, and it doesn't work, for all the reasons that Ian described. And it wasn't a UBI, but those models have similar problems. When you pay people to stay at home, people don't get their psychological needs satisfied. And when your psychological needs are not satisfied, you seek ways of doing it outside with drugs, addictions, etc. So it's not a good life. That's not, I personally think, is a dystopian world. We should be seeking something else. And I'm an engineer, so I believe, or I look at technologies as opportunity, but also we have come to realize all these negative aspects, and we need to deal with that.
So thank you very, very much to Amel, to Ian, to Raphael. And I'll just say that I think the two great challenges of our time are inequality and climate, and the future of work sits at the center of trying to address both of those, as well as restructuring the way our states, our societies produce, distribute, and consume everything. So no small challenge, and we confront it, and with people like this on the stage, I feel more confident that we can tackle it. Ollie.
Paul, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Mansell, thank you so much for your talk. Ladies and gents, I'm going to ask just to keep our panel here just for our closing 2 minutes. This is a bit like suddenly realizing you're at a New Year's Eve party and it's 2 minutes to midnight, because actually we don't all come together as a mass during CogX this year. We have our own individual closing party, if you like, so don't worry, the champagne's not going to be popping. But first of all, another round of applause, not just for one of the best sessions I've seen at CogX, but for one of the most interesting sessions I have ever seen. Thank you so much. I thought that was knockout. Really good. Really good. Now, in our final 2 minutes, as the clock ticks on, I just want to make a couple of quick points about the future and about CogX as well. We hinted at CogX 2020. You'll be pleased to hear the news is out. Mark your diaries. June 10th to the 12th have just been released. There you go. We hope you'll join us back here in King's Cross. Overall, we hope... Huh?
With less
With
rain.
less rain, absolutely right, yeah, weather permitting. No, come what may, we'll be here. We hope you will see the undertone of these global goals over the last 3 days, pointing our tools and our talents at solving the biggest problems worth solving. I hope it's been really obvious and that it will have inspired so many connections, because actually the team at CogX want you to know, and it is absolutely true, it is your knowledge network, and that is a human network if it is to be anything. So it's about the connections in this room and where we go from here. That is what is most important. If you're not sated, if your appetite remains to see brilliant talent, look at 2 o'clock. Teens in AI, it's going to be a hackathon. I've just met the most extraordinary secondary school people. Remember this name, Rahi Premji. He'll be pitching along with other teens in AI at 2 o'clock. Go and have a look. Ian has very graciously agreed to sign some copies of your latest book, if that's okay, in our bookshop. Which is where? Well, where is the CogX bookshop? You're absolutely right, don't worry. It's not a movable bookshop, but we will find... Where is it? It's in the expo, and we will lead you to it. Don't worry, you're not going to get lost. You're not going anywhere. So that brings me to the final moment, which is I'm going to actually ask as sort of hopefully not quasi-religious, but if everyone to be upstanding, please. Don't worry, we're not going to sing or hold hands, but I would love you to be upstanding. No, join me, why not, guys? Yeah. Because I just wanted to say a few thank yous. And firstly, to those who have gone before, who have stood on this stage and every other of the 10 stages over the last 3 days. Now, I know that it's only right that we put a huge round of applause together for everyone who's been through CogX this year. Especially to these 4 brilliant contributors. My second thank you goes to the people through the wind and the rain and the chill and everything else who've been buzzed with energy. And that's the venues team and the CogX team and on lights and sound and everything else. I'm just going to ask them just quickly to come up as we close, actually, because you're behind the scenes 99.9% of the time, and CogX actually doesn't happen without you guys. So come on. I just think I have had nothing but positive interactions with these guys over the last year. So it's a huge, huge thank you to you. And on behalf, and I'm channeling the spirit of Tabitha Goldstaub and Charlie Muirhead here, but also let's just give a quick round of applause to the whole CogX team behind the scenes across all those stages as well. Thank you. All right, well, this has been CogX 19, but our final round of applause, and why not applaud each other as well? But it goes to you. If you don't rock up, if you don't attend, these connections don't get made, these problems don't get solved. So we will see you at CogX 2020, and hopefully for the next 100 years beyond. Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. And if you want to meet our speakers, they're coming down the central aisle for you now, so we might see them in a minute. Thank you.